Chapter 31 of the Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Oldman. Chapter 31. Invitation to visit the outlaws. Interview with the elk that calls. Profitable trade with the outlaws. Return to the post. Great alarms among the traders. 5 horses killed at the fort. Flight from the Sioux. Safe arrival at the fort. Trade with the Arapahoes. Attacked by a Cheyenne warrior. Peace restored. While in the midst of my occupations, a messenger was dispatched to me by the chief of a Cheyenne village, at that time encamped about 20 miles distant, with an invitation to visit them and trade there. This village was composed of outlaws from all the surrounding tribes, who were expelled from their various communities for sundry infractions of their rude criminal code. They had acquired a hard name for their cruelties and excesses, and many white traders were known to have been killed among them. The chief's name was Mohe-Nistu, the elk that calls, and he was a terror to all white people in the region. The village numbered 300 lodges, and could bring from 12 to 1,500 warriors into the field, the best fighters of the nation. We called it the City of Refuge. The messenger arrived at my post and inquired for the Crow. "I am the Crow," I answered. "The great chief, Mohe-Nistu, wants the Crow to come to his lodge." "What does he want with me?" "He wants to trade much." "What does he want to trade?" "He wants much whiskey, much beads, much scarlet, much kettles," and he enumerated a list of articles. "Have your people any robes by them?" "Look, they have so much robes that they cannot move without them." "Any horses?" "Great many good Crow horses." "Well," said I will go straightway, and you must show me the way." "Who will go to the village of the Elk of Calls?" I asked. "I want 2 men. Peterson and another volunteered to accompany me, but by this time the matter in hand had reached Sublet's ears, and he came forward and said, "You are not going to the village of the outlaws, Beckwourth?" "Yes," I replied, "I am." "Don't you know they kill whites there?" "Yes, I know that they have killed them." "Well, I object to your going." "Captain Sublet," I said, I have promised the Indian that I will go, and go I must. There has been no trader there for a long time, and they are a rich prize." He saw that I was resolved, and, having given me the control of the affairs, he withdrew his objection, and said no more. I accordingly prepared for the journey, ordering the horses. I packed up my goods, together with 20 gallons of whiskey, and issued forth on my way to uncertain destruction, and bearing with me the means of destruction certain. The Indian conducted me to the chief's lodge. I dismounted, my 2 men following my example. The chief came to us and passed the usual compliments. He had desired me to take off my packs, at which request I immediately remounted my horse. "What is the matter?" inquired the chief. "When I sent for my friends to come and see me," I said, "I never asked them to unpack their horses or to guard them, but I have it done for them." "You are right, my friend," he said. "It shall be done. Get off your horse and come into my lodge." I dismounted again, was about to follow him. My men, who did not understand our conversation, arrested my path to inquire what was in the wind. I bade them keep quiet, as all was amicable, and then entered the lodge. We held a long conversation together, during which the chief made many inquiries of a similar nature to those addressed me at the first village. In recounting our achievements, I found that I had stolen his horses, and that he had made reprisals upon the Crows, so that we were about even in the horse trade. At length he wished me to broach the whiskey. "No," said I, "my friend, I will not open the whiskey until you send for your women to come with their robes, and they have brought what goods they want first. They work hard, and dress all your robes. They deserve to trade first. They wish to buy many things to wear, so that your warriors may love them. When they have traded all they wish, then I will open my whiskey, and the men can get drunk. But if the men get drunk first, Your women will be afraid of them, and they will take all the robes, and the women will get nothing." "Your words are true, my friend," said the chief. "Our women shall trade before the men get drunk. They dress all our robes. It shall be according to your words." Accordingly, he sent for all the women who had robes and wished to sell, to come and trade with the Crows. They were not long in obeying the summons. Forward they came, some with one robe, some with two. Two was the most that any of them had, as the men had reserved the most to purchase whiskey. The trading was expeditiously effected. We did not have to take down and open all our goods, and then sell a skein of thread, and be informed by our customer that she would look elsewhere first, and perhaps call again, which is the practice of many young ladies, especially where there is an attractive shopman. We could hardly hand out things fast enough. We served all the women to their entire satisfaction, and closed out our stock of dry goods. We then proceeded to the whiskey. Before opening the kegs, I laid down my rules to the chief. I told him that his people might spree as long as they chose, but they must not obstruct my business or interfere with me. As the liquor was served out to them, they must carry it out of the lodge, and not stay to be in my way and give me trouble. This was readily assented to, and the sales began. Whiskey will have the same effect everywhere, and if a man will traffic in the cursed stuff, he must submit to his share of the mischief he creates. My understanding with the chief was productive of no effect. He came into the lodge, saying, "I have killed an Indian." I looked and saw that his battle-axe was dripping with blood. Yells and tumult increased outside. The chief was again making his way towards the lodge, protected by a host of friends, while behind him, and striving to get at him, was an infuriated throng, fighting and yelling like devils. My store in an instant was filled to overflowing with opposing parties, composed of outlaws from a dozen tribes. I sprang to secure my gun and my companions. Mistaking my movements, supposed I had started to run, and they broke out at the back of the lodge, and did not stop until they reached our post on the Platte. Battle-axes and knives fairly rung through the lodge during the continuance of the fight, but it was over in a few minutes, and they withdrew to the place outside and renewed it to greater advantage. At the restoration of peace, some ghastly wounds were shown to me, but singular to say, none of the belligerents were killed. Mohenestu, after a short interval, returned, without having received a single scratch, and said all was quiet again, and that they wanted more whiskey. The women wished to get some also, he informed me. I knew that, if the women were going to join in, I must have another supply, and I told the chief I had not enough left to get the women drunk. "Send for more, then," said he. "Our women are buried up and smothered with robes, and will buy very much." I soon found a volunteer to run to the post to carry an order to Sublet to send me 20 gallons more of whiskey. My assistants, after making their hasty exit from the back of the chief's lodge, reported at the post the state of affairs at the village of the outlaws at the time they left. Guns were being fired, they said, and beyond all doubt Beckwourth was killed. No one dared to go and ascertain the result. Sublet was in great trouble. I did my utmost to prevent his going, he consoled himself by saying, but he went in opposition to all orders and advice. So if he is killed, the responsibility does not rest upon me. By and by, my messenger arrived with the order for more whiskey. Sublet took the letter and read it. "Oh," said he, "Jim is not dead yet. He has sent for more firewater. Who will take it to him?" 4 men volunteered for the errand, and arrived with it the next day. The Indians took their horses away from them, and they became alarmed. But when they shortly after saw me up to my neck in buffalo robes, their fear subsided. These 2 kegs went off as actively as the preceding, and the robes fairly poured in. The whole village moved on towards the post, singing, dancing, and drinking, and when I had approached within 5 miles, I had to send for 2 kegs more. In short, the 60 gallons of firewater realized to the company over 1,100 robes and 18 horses, worth in St. Louis $6,000. This trading whiskey for Indian property is one of the most infernal practices ever entered into by man. Let the reader sit down and figure up the profits on a 40-gallon cask of alcohol, and he will be thunderstruck, or rather whiskey-struck. When disposed of, 4 gallons of water are added to each gallon of alcohol. In 200 gallons, there are 1,600 pints, for each one of which the trader gets a buffalo robe worth $5. The Indian women toil many long weeks to dress these 1,600 robes. The white trader gets them all for worse than nothing, for the poor Indian mother hides herself and her children in the forest until the effect of the poison passes away from her husband, fathers, and brothers, who love them when they have no whiskey, and abuse and kill them when they have. $6,000 for 60 gallons of alcohol. Is it a wonder that, with such profits in prospect, men get rich who are engaged in the fur trade, or is it a miracle that the poor buffalo are becoming gradually exterminated, being killed with so little remorse that their very hides among the Indians themselves are known by the appellation of a pint of whiskey? The chief made me a gratuity of 40 robes. On 2 subsequent visits I paid him on his invitation. He made me further presents until he had presented me with 185 robes without receiving any equivalent. The extent of his royal munificence seriously alarmed Sublet. It was just this same profuse spirit, he said, that had bred disputes with other traders, often resulting in their losing their lives. It is as well a savage custom as civilized to expect a commiserate return for any favors bestowed, and an Indian is so punctilious in the observance of this etiquette that he will part with his last horse and his last blanket rather than receive a favor without requital. Mi Honestu, without intending it, was rather troublesome on this point. When he became sober after these drunken carousals, he would begin to reflect seriously on things. He would find his robes all gone, his women's labor, for it would take months of toil in dressing and ornamenting these robes, thrown unprofitably away. His people had nothing to show for their late pile of wealth, and their wants would remain unsupplied. They would have no guns or ammunition to fight the Crows, who were always well supplied, and their whole year earnings were squandered. These reflections would naturally make him discontented and irritable, and he would betake himself to the post reparations. "White man," he would say, "I have given you my robes, which my warriors have spent months in hunting, which my women have slaved a whole year in dressing, and what do you give me in return? I have nothing. You give me firewater, which makes me and my people mad, and it is gone, and we have nothing to hunt more buffalo with, and to fight our enemies." The generality of traders will endeavor to make it apparent to him that there was a fair exchange of commodities effected, and that he had the worth of his wares, and they can do no more for him. This angered him, and in his disappointment and vexation he would raise the war-whoop. His warriors would rush to him. He would harangue them for a moment. An assault would be made upon the trading post. The goods would be seized, and in many instances the trader would be massacred and scalped. I saw the necessary relation between all these events, and knew that simple justice in exchanges would avoid all such catastrophes. I therefore told Sublet to feel no uneasiness, as I could arrange matters so as to afford a general satisfaction. "Well," he said, "go your own way to destruction." A day or 2 after this, Sublet came to inform me that Mohinestu was on his way to the fort. I looked out, and saw the chief and his wife both approaching on horseback. As he entered, I received him with great ceremony, taking him by the hand and bidding him welcome to the fort. I had his horse well attended to, a sumptuous supper for himself and his wife served up, and while the meal was preparing, entertained him with liquors fit to make any toper's mouth water. After supper he got gloriously fuddled, and went to bed, ignorant of what was passing in the world around him. In the morning, I inquired of him how he felt. Wugh, much bad, headache strong. I then gave him another whiskey punch, well flavoured with spices. He and his lady drank deeply, and then partook of a hearty breakfast. He then felt well again. I next led him into the store, where we had a large assortment of every Indian novelty. I knew we had children as well as hominies, so I selected a 5-striped Hudson Bay blanket for himself, another for his wife, and one for each of his children, beside an extra scarlet blanket for his eldest son, a young warrior. To his wife I also gave a 2-gallon brass kettle, and beads enough to last her for a year or two. In fact, I selected more or less of every description of article that I thought would be useful to them, or that I thought an Indian eye could covert. These presents I ceremoniously laid upon the counter, until I had 2 or 3 large piles of quite attractive-looking goods. The chief and his wife had watched me laying all these goods before there. I then asked them if they saw anything more anywhere in the store that they thought they would like. Mihonestu opened his eyes wide with surprise. "What?" he exclaimed. "Are all those things for us?" "Yes," I said, "they are for you, your wife, and your children. Something for you all. When I have a friend, I like to be liberal in my gifts to him. I never rob the red men. I never take all their robes and give them nothing but whiskey. I give them something good for themselves, their wives, and their children. My heart is big. I know what the red men want, and what their families want. My friend, your heart is too big. You give me much more than I ever had before. You will be very poor." "No," I said, "I have many things here, all mine. I am rich, and when I find a good friend, I make him rich like me." I then bade him look the store carefully through, to see if there was anything more that he would like. He looked, but saw nothing more that he needed. I then made the same request of his wife, whose satisfaction beamed all over her face, but she too was fully supplied. I then stepped into another room, and returned with a fine new gun, with 100 rounds of ammunition, and a new, highly finished, silver-mounted battle-axe. This was the comble de bienfaits. I thought he would not recover from the shock. He took the battle-axe in his hand, and examined it minutely, his face distorted with a broad grin all the while. "Huge," said he, "you give me much too much. I gave you no robes, but you have proved that you are my friend." When they were ready to start, there was an extra horse for him, and a fine mare for his wife, ready waiting at the door. "There, my friend," said I, "is a good horse for you. He is swift to run the buffalo. Here is a fine mare for you," I said to his wife. "Indian women love to raise handsome colts. I gave her to you, and you must not let the Crows steal her from you." She displayed every tooth in her head in token of her satisfaction, and she mounted to return home. The chief said as he left, "I am going on a war party, and then to kill buffalo. I will come back again in a few moons. I will then come and see you, and I will kill you. I will crush you to death with robes." And away they went, never better satisfied in their lives. Now, is it to be supposed that the company lost anything by this liberality? That chief, whose hands were stained with the blood of so many traitors, would have defended my life till the last gasp. While I was in his country, no other trader could have bartered a plug of tobacco with him or his people. The company still derived great profits from his trade. Besides the immense returns derived from my transactions with the village, I cleared over $500 from my exchanges with the chief alone, after the full value of my munificent presents had been deducted. One day the Cheyenne dog soldiers were to have a dance and count their coups. I called all the Crows who were in the band, and asked them if the regulations would admit of my joining in the dance. Certainly, they said. Nothing will please them more. They will then believe that you have joined them. Accordingly, I painted myself, put on a uniform, including a chief's coat, now new from the shelves, and painted my white leggings with stripes, donating a great number of coups. When ready, I walked towards them as great a man as any. On seeing me approach, there was a general inquiry. "Who is that? Where did he come from?" When the ceremonies commenced, I joined in, and danced as hard as any of them. The drum at last sounded, to announce the time to begin to count. I stepped forward first, and began. "Cheyennes, do you remember that you had a warrior killed at such a place, wearing such and such marks of distinction?" "Yes, we know it." "I killed him. He was a great brave." There was a tap on the drum, and one coup was counted. I proceeded until I had counted my 5 coups, which is the limited number between the dances. Next in turn, the bob-tailed horse counted his 5 on the Crows, and to his various allusions I assented with the customary "I remember." This betrayed who I was, and they were delighted to see one of the dog soldiers of the Crows join their band. The bob-tailed horse made me a valuable present, and I returned to the fort with 6 splendid war horses and 30 fine robes presented to me at that dance, as my initiation gifts, or bounty money, I suppose, for joining their army. I was then a dog soldier in the picked troop of the Cheyennes, compelled to defend the village against every enemy until I died, like Beckwourth, with harness on his back. The Crows had been informed by sundry persons in the employ of the American Fur Company that I had joined their inveterate enemies. They were satisfied with my proceedings. "The Medicine Calf is a cunning chief," they said. "He best knows how to act. He has joined the Cheyennes to learn all about their numbers, the routes of their villages, and so forth. When he has learned all that he wants, he will return to us, and then we can fight the Cheyenne to greater advantage." I was now in my 2nd winter with Sublet in the Cheyenne and Sioux country. He had succeeded far beyond his expectation, and he still continued to make money by thousands. We had curtailed the number of sub-posts, and thereby materially reduced his expenses. Indeed, they were now less than half of what they were the preceding winter. Leaving Sublets, I went down to the South Platte, distant 150 miles, and indulged in a short rest, till I heard that the Cheyennes of the Arkansas, those that I first visited, were about to make their spring trade, and I went over to meet them and bring them to our fort. I found them. All appeared to be glad to see me, and they returned with me. In crossing the divide or ridge between the 2 rivers, our spies in advance discovered a party of Pawnees, and a charge was immediately made upon them. We only killed 3 of the enemy. I counted a coup by capturing a rifle. The victim who abandoned it had already been killed. While we engaged the enemy, the village went into camp, and I proposed to my fellow warriors to return to the village after the manner of the Crows, which was agreed to. There were several in the party, so we could easily raise a good Crow song, and the Cheyenne warriors could join in. We struck up merrily and advanced towards the village. As soon as the women heard our voices, they ran out to see who was coming. There were several captive Crows among the Cheyenne, who, I suppose, had lived among them ever since I had been sold to the whites. These recognized our stave, and exclaimed, "Those are Crows coming. We know their song." This brought out the whole village, who stood waiting our arrival, in surprise and wonderment. As we drew near, however, they distinguished me in the party, and the mystery was solved. The Crow is with the Cheyennes. We performed all kinds of antics, made a circuit round the village, going through evolutions and performances which the Cheyennes had never before seen, but with which they were so highly pleased that they adopted the dance into the celebrations of their nation. That night, the scalp dance was performed, which I took part in as a great man as any. I sung the Crow song to the especial admiration of the fair sex. The next morning we resumed our journey to the fort, which we reached after 3 days' travel. The village had brought a great number of robes, together with some beaver, and a great trade was opened with them. At this time I had a difficulty with a Cheyenne, the only one I ever had with any of the tribe. I was eating dinner one day when a great brave came in and demanded whiskey. I repaired to the store with him to supply his want, when I found he had no robes to pay for it, and was, beside, intoxicated. I refused to give him the whiskey, telling him he must first go and bring a robe. This probably aggravated him, and he made a sudden cut at me with his sword, which I very fortunately dodged, and before he could raise his weapon again, I had him between my feet on the ground, and I had left my battle axe on my seat at the table, and I called out for someone to bring it to me, but no one came with it. I at length released him, and he went whooping away to obtain his gun to shoot the Crow. I seized my own and waited for him at the door, while all the inmates of the fort begged of me not to shoot him. After some little delay, he appeared, gun in hand, but 3 Cheyenne warriors interfered to stop him, and he returned into his lodge. The day following, he sent for Sublet and myself to go and dine with him, and we went accordingly. Sublet was apprehensive of mischief from my visit, and endeavored to dissuade me from going, but I foresaw no danger, and knew further that it would be a cause of offense to the Indian to neglect his invitation. When we entered his lodge, he was glad to see us, and bade me to be seated on a pile of robes. I sat down as desired, and our host, after holding a short conversation with Sublet, turned to me and spoke as follows. "Oh, Tunny Crow, I was a fool yesterday. You spared my life. I do not want you to be angry with me, because I am not angry with you. I was drunk. I had drunk too much of your whiskey, and it made my heart black. I did not know what I was doing." "Very well," said I am not angry with you. When you attempted to kill me, I was angry, and if my battle axe had been in my hand, I should have killed you. You are alive, and I am glad of it. "Take those robes," he rejoined, "and hereafter you shall be my brother, and I will be your brother. These robes will make your heart right, and we will quarrel no more." I took the robes with me, 10 in number, and found my heart perfectly mollified. Messrs. Sublet and Vasquez, having realized immense profit during their 3 years of partnership, disposed of all their interest and effects in the Rocky Mountain fur business, and returned to St. Louis. This threw me entirely out of business, when Messrs. Bent and Savarin wished to engage me in their employ. After some negotiation with them, I concluded a bargain, and entered into their service in the latter part of the summer of 1840. We immediately proceeded to establish sub-posts in various directions, and I repaired to Laramie Fort. As soon as it was known among the Indians that the Crow was trading at Bent's Post, they came flocking in with their robes. Old Smoke, the head chief of another band of outlaws known as Smoke's Band, claimed by no particular nation or tribe, visited me with his village, and commenced a great spree. I gave them a grand entertainment, which seemed to tickle their taste highly. They kept up their carousal until they had parted with 2,000 robes, but had no more remaining. They then demanded whiskey, and I refused it. "No trust," the motto we see inscribed in every low drinking saloon in St. Louis, is equally our system in dealing with the Indians. They became infuriated at my refusal, and clamored and threatened if I persisted. I knew it was no use to give way, so I adhered to my resolution. Thereupon they commenced firing upon the store, and showered the bullets through every assailable point. The windows were shot entirely out, and the assailants swore vengeance against the Crow. According to their talk, I had my choice, either to die or give them whiskey to drink. I had but one man with me at the store. There had been several Canadians in the fort, but on the first alarm they ran to their houses, which was built around the fort within the pickets, to obtain their guns. But on the Indians informing them that they would not hurt them, that it was only the Crow they were after, the Canadians stayed within doors and abandoned me to my fate. I and my companion sat down with our rifles ready cocked, well prepared to defend the entrance to the fort. We had plenty of guns in hand ready loaded, and there must a few have fallen before they passed the gate. At dusk I closed the door, and we lay upon our arms all night. The Indians kept up a great tumult and pother, but attempted nothing. Messrs. Bent and Severine arrived in the morning, and wanted to be informed of the cause of the disturbance. I acquainted them, and they approved my conduct. They were astonished at my immense pile of robes, and applauded my fortitude. When the outlaws became sobered, they expressed contrition for what they had done, and charged their excesses upon John Barleycorn, which plea I admitted. At the same time, it appeared quite inconsistent that I, who was that celebrated gentleman's high priest, should be set upon and almost murdered by his devotees. Nothing noteworthy occurred until the following January, when the Indians, being again on a spree, once more attempted my life. I fled to a post in the Arapaho country in charge of Mr. Alex Warfeld, now a colonel in the army. He resigned the post to me, and took my place at Bent's post. I had but little trouble with the Indians here. Cut Nose, an old brave, who, it seems, had been in the habit of obtaining his drams of Warfield gratis, expected to be supplied by me on the same terms. I had resisted this invasion, and seriously ruffled the feathers of the old chief thereby. He left at my refusal, and did not return again that day. During the ensuing night, the Pawnees came and stole both his horse and mine. The old man raised a party, went in pursuit, recaptured all the horses, took 2 scalps, and returned in high spirits. He visited the store and informed me what he had done. Well, said I, that is because I gave you no drink yesterday. If I had given you whiskey, you would have drunk too much, been sick this morning in consequence, then you would not have been able to pursue the Pawnees, and you would have lost your horses. However, I gave him some whiskey then, in honor of his achievements. This, as I had expected, pleased the old fellow, and he restored me my horses, and charged me nothing for their recapture. As soon as the spring trade was over, I abandoned that post and returned to the Arkansas. Saverin desired me to go and see if I could open a trade with a village of Arapahoes, which he had heard were encamped at 40 miles distance. I accordingly started in their direction, accompanied by 2 men. We journeyed on until we had arrived within a short distance of the village, when we discovered on our road a band of 300 or 400 traveling Indians. I saw that they were Comanches, and I bade the 2 men to run for their lives, as I knew the Comanches would kill them. I directed them to the Arapaho village, and bade them shout their loudest when they came in sight of it. They left me, and ascended a slight eminence a little distance in advance, and then, shouting to the extent of their lungs, they put their horses down at the best speed. I rode up after them, and telegraphed with my blanket to the village to have them come quickly. They obeyed my motions, and fell in with the Comanches on the way to me. The 2 tribes proved to be friends, and my companions were safe. On arriving at the village, I found abundance of robes, and opened a very successful trade with the people. This finished, I returned to the fort, and assisted the other employees in loading the wagon for their trip to St. Louis. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of The Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Oldman. Chapter 32. First trip to New Mexico. Return to the Indians with goods. Success in trade. Enter into business in St. Fernandez. Got married. Returned to the Indians. The fortunate speculation. Proceed to California with goods. I had now accumulated a considerable sum of money, and thought I might as well put it to some use for my own profit, as risk my life in the service of others, while they derived the lion's share from my industry. It was now about 3 years since I had left St. Louis on my present excursion, and I began to weary of the monotony of my life. I was within 5 days' journey of New Mexico, and I determined upon going to take a look at the northern portion of this unbounded territory. I had but one man with me, named Charles Town, when I started upon my new exploration. On our road thither, we passed near to a Utah village, and 2 or 3 of their warriors presented themselves before us to hold a parley, while the chief sat down on a log close by. They said, as we reined in our horses for a moment, "You make our paths bad by coming into our country. You will go back and tell the Cheyennes and Arapahoes where we are. They will then come and kill us and steal our horses. Come here. Our chief wants to see you." This was spoken in tolerably good Spanish. "Come on," said I, addressing my companion. "Let us not be annoyed by these trifling Indians," and I urged my horse against the Indian spokesman, knocking him into the dirt. He arose, exclaiming, "Whoa, Shawnee!" We then rode on without further molestation. They evidently mistaken me for a Shawnee. They had robbed several white men, and after beating them savagely had liberated them. I had no manner of fear of them, for I knew them to be great cowards. With 150 good Crow warriors, I would have chased 1,000 of them. We passed on into St. Fernandez, and found quite a number of American traders there, established in a business and supplying both mountaineers and Indians with goods. Here I encountered an old acquaintance named Lee, with whom I entered into partnership. We purchased 100 gallons of alcohol and a stock of fancy articles to return to the Indian country and trade for robes and other peltry. We visited the Cheyennes on the South Fork of the Platte. We passed Bent's Fort on our way thither. He hailed us and inquired where we were going. I informed him that we were on our way to the Cheyenne village. He begged me not to go, as I value my safety. It was only the day previous, he said, that he had traded them and bought 18 horses from their village. They came the next morning and took them forcibly back, and threatened him with their guns if he said a word against their proceedings. I replied to him that I anticipated no danger, and left him to pass on to their village. The Indians were delighted at my arrival. I had heard that the whooping cough was very prevalent among the children, and as we happened to have several baskets of corn and beans and a large quantity of dried pumpkins, we could not have come at a more opportune moment. I told the Indians, in answer to their welcome, that I had come back to see them because I had heard their children were all sick. I called attention to my stock of vegetable esculents as being best adapted for food for their children, and the best calculated to restore them to health. Besides, I added, I brought a little whiskey along to put good life into your hearts. They were then in their sobered feelings, which will return to them after their carousels, and which present so dangerous a time to the trader. Their horses were all away, their robes were gone, they had nothing to show in return for them. Their children were sick and dying, their wives mourning and half distracted, and they could obtain nothing at the fort to alleviate their sufferings. I could understand the whole corollary of incidents, like their intemperate white brethren, who will occasionally review manners after a prolonged spree, and who will see the effects of dissipation in their desolate homes, their heartbroken wives, their ragged and starving children. What are their feelings at such contemplation? Unquestionably hostility against the cause of their destitution, whether they recognized it in themselves the willing instruments, or the liquor that infatuated them, or the dealer that supplied it to them. The Indians seem to have one circle of reasoning and invariably vent their spleen upon the trader. It was this reactionary feeling that had led the Indians to recover, by force of arms, the horses they had parted with previously. I knew better how to manage them. I deposited my goods at old Bark's lodge, who felt highly honored with the trust. The villagers collected round, and a dispute arose among them whether the whiskey should be broached or not. Porcupine Bear objected, and Bobtail Horse, his brother-in-law, strongly advocated my opening the kegs. This led to a warm altercation between the two warriors, until the disputed question was to be decided by the arbitrament of battle. They both left the lodge to prepare for the combat, and returned in a few minutes fully armed and equipped. Porcupine Bear argued his cause in the following strain. Cheyennes, look at me, and listen well to my words. I am now about to fight my brother. I shall fight him, and shall kill him if I can. In doing this, I do not fight my brother, but I fight the greatest enemy of my people. Once we were a great and powerful nation. Our hearts were proud, our arms were strong. But a few winters ago, all other tribes feared us. Now the Pawnees dare to cross our hunting grounds and kill our buffalo. Once we could beat the Crows and unaided destroy their villages. Now we call other villages to our assistance, and we cannot defend ourselves from the assault of the enemy. How is this, Cheyennes? The Crows drink no whiskey. The earnings of their hunters and toils of their women are bartered to the white man for weapons and ammunition. This keeps them powerful and dreaded by their enemies. We kill buffalo by the thousands. Our women's hands are sore with dressing the robes, and what do we part with them to the white trader for? We pay them for the white man's firewater, which turns our brains upside down, which makes our hearts black, and renders our arms weak. It takes away our warriors' skills, makes them shoot wrong in battle. Our enemies who drink no whiskey, when they shoot, always kill their foe. We have no ammunition to encounter our foes, and we have become as dogs, which have nothing but their teeth. Our prairies were once again covered with horses, as the trees were covered with leaves. Where are they now? Asked the Crows, who drink no whiskey. When we are all drunk, they come and take them from before our eyes. Our legs are helpless, and we cannot follow them. We are only fearful to our women, take up their children, and conceal themselves among the rocks and in the forests. For we are wolves in our lodges. We growl at them like bears when they are famishing. Our children are now sick. Our women are weak with watching. Let us not scare them away from our lodges, with their sick children in their arms. The Great Spirit will be offended at it. I had rather go to the great and happy hunting ground now than live and see the downfall of my nation. Our fires begin to burn dim, and will soon go out entirely. Many people are becoming like the Pawnees. They buy the whiskey of the trader, and, because he is weak and not able to fight them, they go and steal from his lodge. I say, let us buy of the Crow what is useful and good, but his whiskey we will not touch. Let him take that away with him. I have spoken all I have to say, and if my brother wishes to kill me for it, I am ready to die. I will go and sit with my fathers in the spirit land, where I shall soon point down to the last expiring fire of the Cheyennes, and when they inquire the cause of this decline of their people, I will tell them with a straight tongue that it was the firewater of the trader that put it out. Old Bark then advanced between the two belligerents, and thus spoke. Cheyennes, I am your great chief, and you know me. My word of this day shall be obeyed. The Crow has come among us again, and has brought us good things that we need. He has brought us a little whiskey. He is poor, while we are yet strong, and we will buy all he has brought with him. This day we will drink. It will make us merry and feel good to one another. We will all drink this once. but we will not act like fools. We will not quarrel and fight and frighten our women and children. Now, as warriors, give me your weapons." This fiat admitted no appeal. It was law and gospel to his people. Disobedience to his command subjected the offender to immediate death at the hands of the Dog Soldiers. The warriors delivered up their battle axes, and the old chief handed them to me. "Crow," said he, "take these weapons that I have taken from my 2 children. Keep them until we have drunk up your whiskey, and let no one have them till I bid you. Now, Crow, we are ready." Slim Face and Gray Head, 2 Dog Soldiers, then harangued the village, and desired all who wished to trade to come and bring their robes and horses to Old Bark's lodge, and to remember that they were trading with the honest Crow, and not with the white man, and that what they paid him was his. They answered the summons in flocks. The women first, according to my established rule. My corn, beans, and pumpkins exhaled like the dew, and I received in exchange their beautiful fancy robes. The women served. The men next came in for whiskey. I sold on credit to some. When one wanted thus to deal, he would tell me what kind of a horse or mule he had. I would appeal to Old Bark for confirmation of the statement. If he verified it, I served the liquor. They all got drunk, Porcupine Bear, the temperance orator, with the rest, but there was not a single fight. All passed off harmoniously. I received over 400 splendid robes, beside moccasins and fancy articles. When I was ready to leave, 38 horses and mules, a number corresponding to what I had marked, were brought forward. I packed up my peltry and sent my partner on in advance with everything except the horse I rode, telling him I would overtake him shortly. I had reserved a 5-gallon keg of whiskey, unknown to all, and when about to start, I produced it and presented it to the crowd. They were charmed and insisted on making me a return. They brought me over 40 of their finest robes, such as the young squaws finished with immense labor to present to their lovers. Old Bark gave me a good mule to pack them, and another chief gave me a second. I then took my leave, promising to return by Leafall. When I passed Bent at his post, he was perfectly confounded. He had seen one train pass belonging to me, and now I was conducting another, when at the same time he had supposed that there was not a robe in the village. "Beckwourth," said he, "how you manage Indians as you do beats my understanding." I told him that it was easily accounted for, that the Indians knew that the whites cheated them, and knew that they could believe what I said. Besides that, they naturally felt superior in confidence in me on account of my supposed affinity of race. I had lived so much among them, I could enter into their feelings, and be in every respect one of themselves. This was an inducement which no acknowledged white trader could ever hope to hold out. I rode on and overtook my partner in advance. He had had an adventure. A party of Cheyennes, led by a chief named Three Crows, had met him and rifled him of a 3-gallon keg of whiskey, which we had reserved for our own use on our way to St. Fernandez. The chief stopped him and said, "I smell whiskey, and we must have some." My partner told him that he had none. "Whoa, my nose don't lie, but your tongue does. I smell it strong, and if you do not hand it out, we shall unpack all your horses and find it." "Well," said the man, "I have a little, but it belongs to the Crow, and he wants it himself." "Give it to me," said the chief, "and tell him that Three Crows took it." There was no alternative, and he gave him the keg. They carried it along until they came to a creek, where they sat down and had a jollification. I passed them while they were in the midst of it, but did not see them, although they saw me. When I met the chief some time subsequently, and charged him with the larceny, he gave me 10 robes and a good horse to compound the felony. We shot several buffalo on our way, enough to load all our horses with meat and tallow. We exchanged our effects in Santa Fe for goods, and carried them to San Fernando, a distance of 60 miles. Here we established a store as our headquarters for the Indian trade, where I resided some time, living very fast and happily, according to the manner of the inhabitants. Among other doings, I got married to Senorita Louise Sandoval. In the fall, I returned to the Indian country, taking my wife with me. We reached the Arkansas about the 1st of October, 1842, where I erected a trading post and opened a successful business. In a very short time, I was joined by from 15 to 20 free trappers with their families. We all united our labors and constructed an adobe fort 60 yards square. By the following spring, we had grown into quite a little settlement, and we gave it the name of Pueblo. Many of the company devoted themselves to agriculture and raised very good crops the first season, such as wheat, corn, oats, potatoes, and abundance of almost all kinds of vegetables. When the spring trade was over, I sent all my peltry to Independence and brought with the proceeds $3,000 worth of articles suitable for the trade in New Mexico. But on the arrival of the goods, the whole country was in a ferment on account of Colonel Cook's expedition from Texas, which resulted so disastrously for the parties concerned. This affected the minds of the New Mexicans unfavorably for my interest, inasmuch as their former preference for United States novelties was now turned into strong repugnance for everything American. I therefore could obtain no sale for my goods, and determined to return to my Indian friends. I bought a load of whiskey to trade for a horse to pack my goods to California, where I intended removing. I succeeded in my adventure and obtained 40 horses and mules, upon which I packed my merchandise, quickly found myself on the way to the Golden State. I started with 15 men, 3 of whom were Mexican. When I reached the Utah country, I found that the Indians were waging exterminating war upon the Mexicans, but I did not learn it in time to save the lives of my 3 unhappy followers, who, lagging too far in the rear, were set upon by the Indians and slain. In passing through their country, I did considerable trading, exchanging my merchandise for elk, deer, and antelope skins very beautifully dressed. I arrived in Pueblo de Angeles, California, in January 1844. There I indulged in my new passion for trade and did a very profitable business for several months. At the breaking out of the Revolution in 1845, I took an active part against the mother country, of which I will furnish some details in my next chapter. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of the Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Oldman. Chapter 33. The California Revolution, Rifle Corps, Position of the Two Armies, Colonel Sutter, Cannonade, Flight of Sutter, His Return, Trial and Subsequent Release. The Upper Californians, on account of the great distance from the Mexican government, had long enjoyed the forms of an independent principality, although recognizing themselves as a portion of the Mexican Republic. They had for years past had the election of their own officers, their governor inclusive, and enjoyed comparatively immunity from taxes and other political vexations. Under this abandonment, the inhabitants lived prosperous and contented. Their hills and prairies were literally swarming with cattle. Immense numbers of these were slaughtered annually for their hides and tallow, and as they had no armies of liberation to support and no costly government to maintain in extravagance, they passed their lives in a state of contentment, every man sitting under his own vine and his own fig tree. 2 years prior to my arrival, all this had been changed. President Santa Anna had appointed one of his creatures Torrejon governor. With absolute and tyrannical power, he arrived with an army of bandits to subject the defenseless inhabitants to every wrong that a debasing tyranny so readily indulges in. Heavy taxes were imposed for the support of the home government, and troops were quartered, to the great annoyance and cost of the honest people. The lives of the inhabitants were continually in danger from 3 excesses of the worthless vagabonds who had been forced upon them. Their property was rifled before their eyes, their daughters were ravished in their presence or carried forcibly to the filthy barracks. The people's patience became at length exhausted, and they determined to die rather than submit to such inflictions. But they were ignorant how to shake off the yoke. They were unaccustomed to war and knew nothing about political organization. However, Providence finally raised up a man for the purpose, General Jose Castro, who had filled the office of commander under the former system, but had been forced to retire into privacy at the inauguration of the Reign of Terror. He stepped boldly forth and declared to the people his readiness to lead them to the warfare that should deliver their country from the scourge that afflicted them. He called upon them to second his exertions, and never desert his banner until California were purified of her present pollution. His patriotic appeal was responded to by all ranks. Hundreds flocked to his standard. The young and the old left their ranches and their cattle grounds and rallied round their well-tried chief. There was at that time quite a number of Americans in the country, and according to their interests and predilections, they ranged themselves upon opposite sides. Our present worthy and much respected citizen, General Sutter, was at that time, if I mistake not, a colonel in the forces in the central government, and at the outbreak of the Revolution he drew his sword for Santa Anna, and entered into active service against the rebels in Pueblo de Angeles. There was an American, long resident in a country, named J. Rowland, who sought my cooperation in the popular cause. He said that every American who could use a rifle was a host against the invaders, and besought me to arm in defense and to influence my men likewise to espouse the cause. I replied to his solicitations by promising him my active cooperation, and also that I would represent his argument to the men living with me. Accordingly, I informed my people that I intended to shoulder my rifle in the defense of life and property, and they were unanimous in their resolution to accompany me. Hence, there were 13 riflemen instead of 1. We shortly after received an accession of 60 more good frontiersmen, and mustered ourselves for service. The company elected me captain, but I declined the office. Mr. Bell finally assumed the command with the promise of my unflinching support in extremities. Our company steadily increased in number until we had 160 men, including native Californians, who joined us with rifles. General Castro's first movement was against Pueblo. He entered the place at the head of his forces and took the fort, arsenal, with all the government arms, ammunition, and stores, with the slight loss of 1 officer wounded. This enabled the rebels to arm themselves, and he was shortly at the head of a small but well-appointed army. The general highly extolled the rifle battalion, and he looked upon it as a powerful support. Castro then took a detachment of rebel troops and proceeded northward to reconnoiter the enemy's position. Our main body also moving in the direction of the enemy as far as Monterey, where were the governor's headquarters. On first hearing the intelligence of the outbreak, the governor had put his forces in motion and issued orders to shoot the rebels wherever met, and destroy their property of whatever kind. General Castro, having proceeded as far as Santa Barbara, a distance of 96 miles, and having obtained full information concerning the movements of the governor, returned and joined the main body. During his expedition, he captured 5 Americans in the Mexican service. He disarmed them, telling them that he had no disposition to injure Americans, and that he would return their arms as soon as he had expelled the enemies of the people. Our forces were concentrated in a large open prairie, the enemy being stationed at no great distance likewise on the prairie. I ascended one morning the summit of a mountain, which would afford me a fair view of the enemy's camp, just to discover their numbers and strength of position. On my road, I encountered 2 Americans who were serving in the capacity of spies to the enemy. I accosted them and expressed surprise to see them in the service of such an old rascal as Torrejon, and recommended them to join the popular cause. But they seemed to have an eye to the promised booty of the rebels, and my arguments could not influence them. I dispatched one of them with a letter to Grant, an American who held the commission of captain in the governor's army, offering him, as we did not wish to fight against our American brethren, to withdraw all the Americans from the rebel ranks, if he would do the same on the side of the governor, and leave the Mexicans and Californians, who were most interested in the issue, to measure their strength. Some Germans who were with us also made the same proposal to Colonel Sutter. Our messenger conveyed the dispatches and delivered the German's letter to Colonel Sutter, who read both that and our letter to Captain Gant. He returned for answer that, unless the Americans withdrew from the insurgent army immediately, he would shoot us every one by 10 o'clock the next morning. This embittered us the more against the barbarity of the opposing power, and we resolved to make their leaders, not excepting Sutter, feel the effect of our rifle as soon as they placed themselves within range. On the following morning, a weak and ineffective cannonade commenced on both sides. We lay low, awaiting the enemy's charge. As their riflemen had shown themselves, and we were desirous to obtain a sight of them, myself, with 7 or 8 others, advanced cautiously in search of them. On our way, we discovered a small cannon, which the enemy had loaded and was about to discharge upon our ranks. Had there been a gunner among them, it must have done us great injury. We advanced within a few yards of the piece, and had raised ourselves up to shoot the artillerymen, when one of our party arrested our aim by suddenly exclaiming, "Don't shoot! Don't shoot!" He then pointed out the enemy's riflemen, carefully emerging from a hollow, with the intention of stealing upon our flank, and saluting us with a volley of lead. I laid down my rifle and hailed them to halt. I recognized a number of the mountaineers among them, with some of whom I had intimate acquaintance, and I urged them to adopt the cause of the people, for the side they had now espoused was one no American should be seen to defend. They heard me through, and all, or nearly all, the Americans were persuaded by my arguments, and returned with me to join our battalion. This assured us of victory. The cannonade was perfectly harmless. Some of the balls passed 300 feet over our heads. Others plowed up the prairie as near to their ranks as ours. All the damage we received was one wagon shivered to pieces and a horse killed under Colonel Price, which animal had been captured by us at Pueblo, and was now serving in the rebel forces with the same rank he had held under government. The desertion of the riflemen seriously affected the enemy's prospects of victory. 10 o'clock had passed, and Colonel Sutter had not put his threat into execution. The enemy finally retired from the field and marched in the direction of Pueblo. I took a party and ascended a mountain to encamp. While thus employed, a courier sent from our commander brought us orders to return immediately. We instantly obeyed and found the army gone, with only one man remaining to direct our steps. On coming up with our forces, we found that our colonel had made a movement which cut off all retreat from the enemy, and which must bring him to an engagement or an unconditional surrender. In the morning, I again took a party with me and mounted an eminence to reconnoiter the enemy's position. We approached to within 500 yards of their camp, where we shot a bullock, which we quietly proceeded to dress. While we were thus engaged, I perceived an officer approaching from the enemy's camp to ascertain who we were. I took my rifle and dodged among the bushes, eager to get a shot at him. But before I do so, one of my men prematurely fired and missed his mark. The officer had dismounted in order to get a nearer view of us, and this admonitory shot warned him back into camp. Myself and another advanced to within 50 rods of it, and boldly seized the officer's horse, and they did not fire a shot at us. We saw their camp was hemmed in on all sides. Our artillery was placed in battery, matches lighted, and men in position. All was ready for action. The enemy, perceiving their desperate condition, sent a flag of truce for a negotiation. Articles of capitulation were eventually drawn up and signed, to the effect that the governor and his forces should immediately lay down their arms and leave for Acapulco as soon as their embarkation could be accomplished. Accordingly, they laid down their arms and marched under escort to the Embaradara, distant 20 miles from Pueblo. The governor was not permitted to return to Monterey, but his lady was sent for to the Embaradara, where she joined her husband, and they quit the country together. Colonel Sutter, on the day of the embarkation, left his detachment of naked Indians with the army and proceeded, as we suppose, to his fort on the Sacramento. But he returned the next day and gave himself up to us. His force of Indians were very well drilled, but would have been far better employed in raising cabbages on his farm than in facing riflemen on the battlefield. A trial was held upon the colonel, which resulted in his full acquittal, with the restoration of all his property fallen into our hands, such as cannon and other military effects, by the surrender of the government forces. The Americans, in jest, probably seemed very desirous to have the prisoner shot, which produced great alarm in his mind, and recalled to his recollection his recent threat to shoot all the Americans in our army. Our countrymen were almost carried on the shoulders of the Californians, in gratitude for their participation in the Revolution, for, although the victory had been a bloodless one, they attributed their easy-won success to the dread inspired by the name of their American Confederates. After seeing the departure of the government troops, the rebel army returned to Pueblo, where they elected Colonel Pico governor. Colonel, now General Castro, commander of the forces, and filled other less important offices. Fandangos, which were continued for a week, celebrated our success, and these festivities over, the insurgents returned to their various homes and occupations. Some few weeks after, a small proportion of the inhabitants sought to displace our newly elected chief magistrate, and appoint some other in his place. I was sent for during the night to guard the governor's palace with my corps of rifles, and we succeeded in capturing the leading conspirators, who were tried and sent to Acapulco in irons. I had a quarrel with the alcalde shortly after this service, and he put me in irons for cursing him. As soon as the governor heard of my misfortune, he had me immediately discharged from confinement. I now resumed my business and dispatched my partner, Mr. Waters, after a fresh supply of goods. But before he had time to return, fresh political commotions supervened. There still seemed to exist in the minds of the majority a strong hankering for the domination of Mexico, notwithstanding they had so recently sided with the revolutionists in shaking off the yokes of the national government. Among other causes of excitement, too, the American adventurers resident there had raised the bear flag and proclaimed their intention of establishing an independent government of their own. This caused us to be closely watched by the authorities, and matters seemed to be growing too warm to be pleasant. In the midst of this gathering ferment, news reached us from Mazatlan of the declaration of war between the United States and Mexico, and I deemed it was fully time to leave. Colonel Fremont was at that juncture approaching from Oregon with a force, if, combined with the Americans resident there, sufficient to conquer the whole country, and I would have liked exceedingly to join his forces, but to have proceeded towards him would have subjected me to mistrust and consequent capture and imprisonment. If I looked south, the same difficulties menaced me, and the west conducted me to the Pacific Ocean. I had but little time to deliberate. My people was at war with the country I was living in. I had become security to the authorities for the good behavior of several of my fellow countrymen, and I was under recognizance for my conduct. The least misadventure would compromise me, and I was impatient to get away. My only retreat was eastward, so considering all things fair in time of war, I, together with 5 trusty Americans, collected 1,800 stray horses we found roaming on the Californian ranchos, and started with our utmost speed from Pueblo de Angeles. This was a fair capture, and our morals justified it, for it was wartime. We knew we should be pursued, and we lost no time in making our way toward home. We kept our herd jogging for 5 days and nights, only resting once a day to eat and afford the animals time to crop a mouthful of grass. We killed a fat colt occasionally, which supplied us with meat, and very delicious meat too, rather costly, but the cheapest and handiest we could obtain. After 5 days' chase, our pursuers relaxed their speed, and we ourselves drove more leisurely. We again found the advantage that I have often spoken of before, of having a drove of horses before us, for as the animals we bestrode gave out, we could shift to a fresh one, while our pursuers were confined to one steed. When we arrived at my fort on the Arkansas, we had over 1,000 head of horses, all in good condition. There was a general rejoicing among the little community at my safe arrival, the Indians also coming in to bid me welcome. I found my wife married again, having been deceived by a false communication. A present husband had brought her a missive purporting to be of my inditing, wherein I expressed indifference towards her person, disinclination to return home, and tendering her a discharge from all connubial obligation. She accepted the document as authentic, and solaced her abandonment by espousing her husband's messenger. My return acquainted her with the truth of the matter. She manifested extreme regret at having suffered herself to be imposed upon so readily, and as a remedy for the evil offered herself back again. But I declined, preferring to enjoy once more the sweets of single blessedness. I left the fort on a visit to San Fernandez. I found business very dull there on account of the war, and great apprehensions were felt by my friends in regard to the result. Perceiving there was no very desirable place to remove to, I returned to my community. General Kearney was just then on his march to Santa Fe. I took a drove of my horses and proceeded down the Arkansas to meet him on his route, for it was probable there might be an opportunity of effecting some advantageous exchanges. The general came up and found me in waiting with my stock. We had been acquainted for several years, and he gave me a very cordial reception. "Beckwourth," said the general, "you have a splendid lot of horses. Really, they must have cost you a great sum of money." "No, General," I replied, "but they cost me a great many miles of hard riding." "How so?" he inquired. "Why, I was in California at the time the war broke out, and, not having men enough at my command to take part in the fighting, I thought I could assist my country a little by starting off a small drove of the enemy's horses, in order to prevent their being used against us." "Ah, Beckwourth, you are truly a wonderful man to possess so much foresight," and he laughed heartily. "However," added he, "trade them off as quickly as possible, for I want you to accompany me. You like a war, and I have a good use for you now." I informed him that I was ready for service, and accordingly I sent all my remaining horses back to my plantation, and went on with the general to Santa Fe, which place submitted without firing a shot. The general sent me immediately back to Fort Leavenworth with dispatches. This was my service during the war. The occupation was a tolerably good one, and I never failed in getting my dispatches through. I enjoyed facilities superior to almost any other man, as I was known to almost all the Indians through whose country I passed. My partner and I had purchased a hotel in Santa Fe, and we transacted a very profitable business there. My associate attended to the business at a hotel, while I carried dispatches at Santa Fe was generally my starting place. Many messengers lost their lives on the route, as at the time there were dispatches to be sent, and I would not be at headquarters to carry them. The distance from Santa Fe to Fort Leavenworth is 913 miles. I have frequently made the trip in from 20 to 25 days. My shortest trip I accomplished in 18. I well knew that my life was at stake every trip that I made, but I liked the employment. There was a continual excitement in it. Indeed, sometimes more than I actually cared about, more particularly when I fell in with the Pawnees. The service furnished an escort of 15 or 25 men, but I always declined the company of troops, as I considered myself safer without them. If I had taken troops with me, it would have led to incessant fights with the Indians, and if they had seen me with white soldiers, they would have been very apt to kill me the first opportunity. Another thing, I did not think the United States regular troops good for anything against the Indians, for I knew that the Comanches would stand and fight them almost man for man. I chanced to fall in with Kit Carson one day, and I was about to start from New Mexico to Fort Leavenworth, and he proposed going with me, as he wished to learn my route. I was very much pleased with his proposal, as I thought that with Kit and his men I should go through strong-handed. I told him that I should rest at Taos one day to get my horses shod, and that he could easily come up with me there or on the road thither. I left with 2 men and stayed at Taos as appointed, but he failed to rejoin us. I rode on as far as my ranch. Still he did not appear. I built a large fire before proceeding into the Indian country, thinking to attract him by the smoke and thus bring him on to our trail. But I saw no more of him, and it was supposed he was lost until he eventually turned up in the city of Washington. We both had a narrow escape from Indians on that trip. I had, contrary to my usual practice, encamped one night in the prairie, and was to start in the morning, when we heard buffalo running close to our camp. On looking out, I saw a great number chased by the Pawnees. Although the Indians were not yet in sight, we made all possible haste to the timber, threw our horses on their sides, gagged them, and fastened them to the ground, and then secreted ourselves in the willows. The Indians flocked around, busied in their pursuit, and some of the buffaloes they dressed within gunshot of our secret camp. I thought that day the longest I had lived through, and I expect the pure animals thought so too, for they lay in one position the whole time without food or water, and without being permitted to whisper a complaint. At night we made good our escape, and arrived at the fort without further difficulty. When I was ready to return to Santa Fe, I could find no one willing to accompany me. The weather was intensively cold. No inducement that I could offer was sufficient to tempt the men to leave their comfortable fires and encounter the perils of the Indians and Jack Frost in the prairies. Many men had been frozen to death on the route, and a general shudder ran through the company when I proposed the journey to them. I could have been furnished with soldiers in plenty, but I was unwilling to take them, as it imposed so much trouble on the road to stay to bury every man that perished with the hardships of the journey. Important dispatches had arrived from Washington, which must go through, and I looked fruitlessly around for a man hardy enough to go with me. At length a boy, a Kentuckian, volunteered. He had followed the army to the fort, and had lived about the barracks until he had become well accustomed to the privations of a camp life. He was an intelligent lad, but unfortunately had a misformation of one of his feet, which seriously impeded his walking. However, I liked his pluck in proposing, and eventually consented to take him. I went with him to the sutler's store and procured him the warmest clothing I could, and then bade him repair to my boarding house and stay there until I was ready to start. When I was prepared for departure, I furnished him with a good horse, and, taking an extra one between us, we started on the long journey. I gave him particular directions that if he should become very cold, he was to acquaint me, and I would stay and build a fire to warm him by wherever there was any wood, but the proposition he declined. 3 days after we reached the Arkansas and encamped, Isaac was busied in preparing supper, while I walked to an eminence close by in order to survey the country. I perceived an immense number of Indians approaching directly towards us, and at not more than 300 or 400 yards distance. I shouted to Isaac to catch the horses quickly and tether them, and I hastened back to camp. He inquired what the matter was, and I told him there were 1,000 Indians coming after us. The approaching individuals belonged to the Comanche tribe, and numbered over 1,000 warriors. They were in full speed. They dashed through the Arkansas with such precipitation that I thought they would throw all the water out of the channel and hurl it onto the bank. I ran in front of the advance and challenged them to stop. They halted for a moment and asked me who I was. I told them the Crow. Thereupon they grabbed me up like a chicken and carried me into our little camp. They had 9 white man's scalps, which to appearance was hardly yet cold, and they said they must kill my white boy, and his scalp would just make 10. I told them the boy was my nephew, and they must not kill him, that great braves never killed boys. They then conversed among themselves a minute or two, and finally said, "He, being your nephew, may live. Tell him to make us some good black soup." I foresaw that my coffee and sugar must suffer. For my black soup they meant coffee. I directed Isaac to set about making it, but to secrete a little for ourselves, if he could do so unperceived. The Comanches had a great fondness for coffee, and I never fell in with them without having to part with all I had, and I sometimes imagined they preferred my coffee and sugar to my scalp. The same day, just before dusk, while jogging steadily along, the boy discovered a small party of Pawnees. I hastily dismounted, tied the heads of our 3 horses together, prevent them from running, and directed the boy to see that they did not move. I then took his gun and my own and went away from the horses. As I was leaving, the boy inquired if he should fire too. I told him no, not unless I was killed, and then to defend themselves as best he could. I took a secure position and fired. An Indian fell. I fired again and killed a second. They cracked away at me, but did no harm. I reloaded and fired again until I had leveled 5 of them, they retreating at every discharge. When the 5th warrior fell, the whole party fell back to cry. I knew that, after they had cried for a few minutes, they would make a rush for revenge. Therefore I shouted to the boy to cut the animals loose and mount in haste. He did so. I sprung on my horse instantly, and we flew away, leaving the mourners to their lamentations. At every foe I shot, the boy would ejaculate, "Whoop! You fetched him. He's got his gruel," and other sayings, thereby displaying more bravery than many men would have shown under similar circumstances. Ever afterwards he considered that we were a match for any number of Pawnees, and as for the Comanches, I can beat them off with black soup. We traveled on for several miles and then encamped. In the morning I started along a ravine for our horses, which had strayed away. I returned towards camp, where I found that they had taken themselves up another small ravine, and that I had passed them. While thus pursuing the stray animals, the boy came to acquaint me that he had seen a great number of Indians. I led the horses to the camp, and then mounted a little rise of ground, from whence I descried a large village. I did not know what tribe they belonged to, though I knew they were not Pawnees, for that tribe never visited this country except on war excursions. I took the boy and walked with him up to the village, but their faces were all strange to me, nor did I like their appearance and movements. On perceiving one at a little distance wrapped in his robe, I thought he might possibly be a chief, and I approached him. He addressed me in Crow. "Ah, my friend, what brought you here?" I replied that, as I was passing through, I thought it well to call on him. "I am glad to see you," said he. "Enter my lodge. My warriors are bad today." The Indians were Apaches, and the chief was named Black Shield, an old and intimate acquaintance. He insisted on my spending the night in the village, which I consented to. He was perfectly rabid towards the whites, and stated his intention to manure the prairie with their bodies the forthcoming season. He would not leave one in the country. I applauded his intention, telling him the whites were unable to fight. Seeing that I was on his side, that is, if my words made me so, he continued, "I have plenty of warriors, plenty of guns and balls, but I'm a little short of powder. When will you return?" I informed him as nearly as I could calculate, but I added that my return was uncertain. "Will you bring me some powder?" he inquired. "I will," I said, "but I shall return by way of the Eagle Nest Hill." "That is the very place I am going to from here," he rejoined, "and if I am not there myself, some of my warriors will be, and they can take it of you." This afforded me no put-off, and I accordingly promised to furnish him with the powder. If the reader will indulge me in a witticism, I beg to assure him that I carry the powder to the old chief in a horn. In the morning he furnished me with meat enough to subsist us for a week, together with new moccasins and sundry other articles. We then bade him adieu and proceeded on our journey, arriving at Santa Fe without any further noteworthy adventure. On reaching my destination, I informed some of my friends of my promise to the Black Shield, and where they could find him to deliver the powder, to enable him to carry out his commendable resolution. A party started to meet him at the appointed spot, but in delivering the powder, they managed to explode it, and he and his warriors only received the bullets, of which they already had plenty. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of the Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Oldman. Chapter 34. Affairs at Santa Fe. Insurrection at Taos. Discovery of the plot. Battle at the Canyon. Battles at Lambeden, at Pueblo, and at Taos. A Mexican woman redeemed from the Indians. Returned to Santa Fe. On my arrival at Santa Fe, I found affairs in a very disturbed state. Colonel Doniphan had just gained the battle of Bracito, and was carrying all before him in that section of the country. He had forwarded orders to Santa Fe for a field battery, in order to make a demonstration against Chihuahua. Major Clark was entrusted with the duty of conveying the artillery to the colonel. Scarcely had he departed when we received intelligence of an insurrection in Taos. The information was first communicated by an Indian from a village between Santa Fe and Taos, who reported to General Price that the Mexicans had massacred all the white inhabitants of that place, and that a similar massacre was contemplated in Santa Fe, of which report full information could be obtained by the arrest of a Mexican who was then conveying a letter from the priest in Taos to the priest in Santa Fe. A watch was immediately set upon the priest's house, and a Mexican was seen to enter. The guard approached the door to arrest the man as he issued, but he, being apprised of the action of the authorities, left the house by another door and escaped. At night there came a violent rapping at my gate, and on going to open it I perceived my friend Charles Town, who, on being admitted, clasped me round the neck and gave vent to uncontrolled emotion. Perceiving that something alarming had occurred, I invited him into the house, spread refreshments before him, and allowed him time to recover himself. He then informed me that he had escaped almost by a miracle from Taos, where all the American residents had been killed. He was a resident there, having married a girl of New Mexico, and his wife's father had apprised him that he had better effect his escape, if possible, for if he was caught he would be inevitably massacred. His father-in-law provided him with a good horse, and he retreated into the woods where, after considerable risk and anxiety, he providentially eluded the assassins. On receiving this alarming information, I lost no time in repairing to the headquarters of General Price, accompanied by my informant, who related the above particulars. General Price immediately adopted the most effective measures. He assembled his officers and instructed them to set a close watch upon the house of every Mexican in the city, and to suffer no person to pass in or out. He also ordered that every American should hold himself in readiness for service during the night. Before morning, several of the most influential Mexican citizens were placed under arrest. In searching them, important conspiracies were brought to light. Correspondence implicating the most considerable residents were read, and a plot was detected of subjecting Santa Fe to the same St. Bartholomew massacre as had just been visited upon Taos. The city was placed under martial law, and every American that could shoulder a musket was called into immediate service. All the ox drivers, mule drivers, merchants, clerks, and commissariat men were formed into ranks and file, and placed in a condition for holding the city. Then, placing himself at the head of his army, 400 strong, General Price marched towards Taos. On arriving at Canjara, a small town about 20 miles from Santa Fe, we found the enemy, numbering 2,000 Mexicans and Indians, were prepared to give us battle. The enemy's lines were first perceived by our advance guard, which instantly fell back upon the main body. Our line was formed, and an advance made upon the enemy, the mountaineer company under Captain Savarine being placed in charge of the baggage. As soon as battle was begun, however, we left the baggage and ammunition wagons take care of themselves, and made a descent upon the foe. He fled precipitately before the charge of our lines, and we encamped upon the field of battle. Next day we advanced to Lambota, where the enemy made another stand and again fled on our approach. We marched on until we arrived at Taos, and the barbarities we witnessed there exceeded in brutality all my previous experience with the Indians. Bodies of our murdered fellow countrymen were lying about the streets, mutilated and disfigured in every possible way, and the hogs and dogs were making a repast upon the remains. Among the dead we recognized that of Governor Bent, who had been recently appointed by General Kearney. One poor victim we saw, who had been stripped naked, scalped alive, and his eyes punched out. He was groping his way through the streets, beseeching someone to shoot him out of his misery, while his inhuman Mexican tormentors were deriving the greatest amusement from the exhibition. Such scenes of unexampled barbarity filled our soldiers' breasts with abhorrence. They became tiger-like in their craving for revenge. Our general directed the desecrated remains to be gathered together, and a guard placed over them, while he marched on with his army in pursuit of the barbarians. Late in the afternoon we arrived at Pueblo, where we found the enemy well posted, having an adobe fort in their front. No attack was attempted that evening, and strict orders were issued for no man to venture out of the camp. In the evening I was visited by a man who informed me that he had a brother at Rio Mondo, 12 miles distant, whom, if he was not already killed, he wished to save from massacre. I determined to rescue him, if possible, and, having induced 7 other good and trusty mountaineers to aid me in the attempt, we left the camp unperceived and proceeded to the place indicated. On our arrival, we found 200 or 300 Mexicans, all well armed. We rode boldly past them, and they dispersed, many of them going to their homes. We reached the door of the Mexican General Montajas, who styled himself the Santa Anna of the North, and captured him. We then liberated the prisoner, we were in quest of, and returned to Taos with our captive general. At Taos we found our forces, which had retired upon that place from Pueblo, after having made an unsuccessful attempt to dislodge the enemy. We informed our general of our important capture, and he affected great displeasure at our disobedience of orders, although it was easy to see that, in his eyes, the end had justified the means. The following morning a gallows was erected, and Montaja was swung in the wind. The correspondence that had been seized in Santa Fe had implicated him in some of the blackest plots, and we thought that this summary disposal of his generalship would relieve us from all further dangers from his machinations. Having procured artillery to bombard the enemy's position, our commander returned to Pueblo. We cannonaded in good earnest, but the pieces were too small to be of much service. But we cut a breach with our axes halfway through the 6-foot wall, and then finished the work with our cannon. While engaged in this novel way of getting at the enemy, a shell was thrown from a mortar at the fort, but our artillerymen, not being very skillful in their practice, threw the shell outside the fort, and it fell among us. A young lieutenant seized it in his hands and cast it through the breach. It had not more than struck before it exploded, doing considerable damage in the fort. We then stormed the breach, which was only big enough to admit one man at a time, and carried the place without difficulty. The company of mountaineers had fallen back midway between the fort and mountain, in order to pick off any Mexican who should dare to show himself. We killed 54 of the defenders as they were endeavoring to escape. Upon the person of one of whom, an officer, we found 160 doubloons. Some of the enemy fired upon us from a position at one corner of the fort, through loopholes, and while looking about for a covert to get a secure shot at them, we discovered a few of the enemy hidden away in the brush. One of them, an Indian, ran towards us, exclaiming, "Bueno, bueno, me like Americanos." One of the party said, "If you like the Americans, take this sword and return to the brush and kill all the men you find there." He took the proffered sword, and was busy in the brush for a few minutes, and then returned with his sword blade dripping with gore, saying, "I have killed them." "Then you ought to die for killing your own people," said the American, and he shot the Indian dead. The battle lasted through the whole day, and a close watch was set at night to prevent the escape of those yet occupying the fort. The assault was renewed the following morning, and continued during the day also. Towards night several white flags were raised by the enemy, but were immediately shot down by the Americans, who had determined to show no quarter. On the third morning all the women issued from the fort, each bearing a white flag, and kneeled before the general to supplicate for the lives of their surviving friends. The general was prevailed upon, and gave orders to cease fire. The enemy lost severely through their disgraceful cowardice. Our company lost but one man through the whole engagement. 9 of the most prominent conspirators were hanged at Taos, and 7 or 8 more at Santa Fe. It was about this time that the report reached us of the butchery of Mr. Waldo, with 8 or 10 other Americans at the Morro. After the insurrection was suppressed, I started again for Fort Leavenworth. On my way back from the fort, I again fell in with Black Shield and his Apaches. I said to him, "You told me false. You said you would meet me at Eagle's Nest, but when I went there you were not to be found. I had to throw the powder away that I brought for you and run for my life, for the whites discovered my errand and were close at my heels." "I know it, my friend," said Black Shield. "We saw your kegs there, but the whites had taken all the powder out. I am sorry they came upon you so suddenly, for we had to run as well as you." The second day after we left the Apaches, we discovered an object in the distance which I at first looked for a stump, but still thought it singular that there should be a stump where there were no trees near. As we approached, the object moved, and we at length discovered it to be a man of the name of Elliott Lee, who had been wounded by the Apaches 3 or 4 days previously, and had not tasted food since. He had belonged to a party of 17 or 18 mountaineers on their way to Santa Fe. They had stopped to rest at the bank of a creek and were suddenly set upon by the Indians. Several of the party were killed, among whom was my friend Charles Town, and all the rest were more or less severely wounded. Some few had succeeded in getting away, notwithstanding their wounds, but Mr. Lee had been shot in the thigh and was unable to crawl along. When we picked him up, he was delirious, and his wound was greatly swollen and inflamed. We gave him food, carried him along with us until we fortunately came up with his wagons. We then gave him into the keeping of his friends and proceeded on our way. On my arrival home, I disposed of all my property in Santa Fe and started to buy horses of the Indians to dispose of to the discharged troops. I had arrived within a short distance of my ranch when I met a man who advised me to conceal myself. 2 rewards had been offered for my apprehension, one of $1,000 by Colonel Price, and another of $500 by Mr. Kissack, quartermaster. I was accused of confederating with rebels and Indians, and assisting them in stealing horses from the whites and leading the hostile bands in their warfare upon the American troops. I listened to his information and was astonished at the invention. "This is news indeed," I said, "but they shall not have the profit all to themselves. I would immediately go and deliver myself up and obtain the rewards." "I advise you as a friend not to go," rejoined my interlocutor, "for they will assuredly hang you directly they lay hands upon you." "Well, hang or not hang," I answered, "I am resolved to go, for I have not been a month absent from Santa Fe, and I can give an account of every day and night I have since spent. At the time I met with my informant, I had an order from Captain Morris of the United States Army in my pocket, authorizing me to pick up all the government horses that I might find in my rambles and bring them in. But up to the time that I was informed of the charges against me, I had found but one horse, the property of Captain Savarine, and it I had restored to the owner. Accordingly, I returned without delay to Taos, where I saw Colonel Willock, who was lieutenant under Colonel Price. Him I acquainted with my determination to proceed to Santa Fe to deliver myself up for the rewards that were offered for my apprehension, but he urgently requested me not to go. He was about to start with an expedition against the Apaches, and wished to engage me as spy, interpreter, and guide. He promised to forward an exculpatory letter to Santa Fe that should set me all right with the authorities. The letter was sent, but not delivered, as the messenger was shot on the way. I concluded to accompany the colonel and aid him to the extent of my ability in the object of his expedition. We started with a small battalion of volunteers for the Apaches. The first day in camp, the common soldier fare was spread for dinner, which at that time I felt but little appetite for. I informed the colonel that I would go out and kill an antelope. "Why," said he, "there is not an antelope within 10 miles around here. The soldiers have scoured the whole country without seeing one." I told him I felt sure I could find one, and took up my rifle and was about to start. "Hold on," cried the colonel. "I will go with you, and will further engage to pack on my back all you kill." We started, and kept on the road for about half a mile, when I discovered the tracks of 3 antelopes, which had just crossed our path and gone in the direction of a hill close by. The colonel did not see the tracks, and I did not point them out to him. We passed on a few rods further, when I suddenly stopped, threw my head back, and began to sniff like a dog scenting his prey. "What the dickens are you sniffing so for?" asked the colonel. "I am sure that I smell an antelope," said I. "You smell antelope?" and the colonel's nostrils began to dilate. "I can smell nothing." "Well, colonel," I said, "there are antelopes close by, I know, for my smellers never yet deceived me. And now," added I, "if you will start carefully up that hollow, I will go up on the other side, and I am confident that one of us will kill one." I knew that if the animals were in the hollow, they would start at the approach of the colonel, and most probably in my direction, and thus afforded me an opportunity of getting a shot at one. I proceeded cautiously along until, raising my head over a knoll, I saw the 3 antelopes which had crossed us. 2 had already lain down, and the third was preparing to do so, when I sent a leaden messenger, which brought him down involuntarily. The colonel shouted to inquire what I had shot at. "Antelope," I answered, and he came running at his best speed. There was the very beast, beyond all dispute, to the utter astonishment of the colonel, who regarded for some moments first the game and then the hunter. "And you smelled them?" He pondered. "Well, I must confess your olfactory nerves beat those of any man I've ever yet fell in with. Smell antelope! Huh! I will send my boy to carry him in." "But that was not the bargain, Colonel," I said. "You engaged to pack in on your back all I should kill. This is your burden. The distance is but short." But the colonel declined his engagement. We finally hung the antelope on a tree, and the colonel, on our return to camp, dispatched his servant to fetch it in. He never could get over my smelling antelope, and we have had as many a hearty laugh at it since. The following morning at daylight I took 5 or 6 men with me, and proceeded on my duty as spy. When the colonel moved on with the troops, we returning to camp every evening at dusk, we frequently saw signs of Indians, but we could make no discovery of the Indians themselves. We continued our chase for nearly a month. Our coffee and sugar had given out, and our provisions were getting low. The soldiers could kill no game, and there was a general disposition, especially among the officers, to return. In leaving the camp, as usual, one morning, I directed the colonel to a camping ground, and started on my search. Late in the afternoon I discovered what I supposed to be a large party of Indians moving in our direction. I ran with all possible speed to communicate the information, but in ascending a small point of land which was in my way, I found a strange encampment of United States troops lying before me. I knew it was not Colonel Willock's command, for these had tents, wagons, and other appointments, which we were unprovided with. When I was first perceived, some of the men pointed me out to their companions. "There's Beckwourth, there's Jim Beckwourth," I heard whispered around. I found it was a detachment commanded by Colonel Edmondson, who had just returned from Santa Fe with a reinforcement, having been defeated in an engagement with the Apaches some time previously. When the colonel saw me, he inquired of my errand. "I have come after horses," I replied in Plestimont, "but I see you have none." "Beckwourth," said Captain Donahue, "I have been defending your character for a long time, and now I want you to clear up matters for yourself." I found I was not in very good savour among the parties present, owing to a mistake in my identity made by one of the soldiers during their late engagement with the Indians. It was supposed I had entered their camp, hurled my lamp through a soldier, and challenged another out to fight, telling him he was paid for fighting, and it was his duty to engage me. This suspicion, added to flying reports of evil doing, which derived their original in the Crow village from my adventure with Fitzpatrick, had associated me in the soldiers' mind with all the horse raids and white massacres they heard rumours of, and I was regarded by them all as a desperate, lawless character, who deserved hanging to the first tree wherever met. At this moment 2 men came running towards the camp at full speed, shouting, "To arms! To arms!" as though the whole Apache nation was behind them. "Where is your party?" asked Colonel Edmondson of me. "Coming yonder, sir," I replied, pointing in the direction of the 2 approaching heralds, for I supposed it was Colonel Willock's command they had seen, and whom, in their fright, they had mistaken for Indians. Immediately there was a bustle of preparations to receive the coming foe. Muskets were snatched up, and the men fell into line, but in a few moments the real character of the approaching company was ascertained, and the colonel advanced to greet them. At the junction of the two parties, both engaged on the same errand, matters were discussed by the two colonels, and it was resolved to abandon the expedition, for it was manifest that the Indians were too much on the alert to be taken. I was dispatched to Santa Fe with a letter to Colonel Price from Colonels Edmondson and Willock, while they resolved to march back with their detachments. Colonel Edmondson to Santa Fe and Colonel Willock to Taos. The morning following, I again set out for Fort Leavenworth, having for companion McIntosh, who, by the way, was a Cherokee and known as such to the Indians whom we fell in with on the road. We reached the fort without any accident and delivered our dispatches safe. On our return, we overtook Bullard and Company's trains of wagons, which were on their way to Santa Fe with supplies for the army. Bullard and his partner proposed to leave their charge and go in with us, if I thought we would be able to keep up with them. I answered that we would try and keep their company as far as possible, but that they would be at liberty to proceed at any time that they considered we retarded them. They went with us as far as the Morro, 2 days' ride from Santa Fe, where we were compelled to leave them, as they tired out and had already detained us 2 full days. My next engagement in the service of Uncle Sam was a trip to Chihuahua to convey dispatches, but previous to starting, Captain Morris wished to engage me as a guide in an expedition against the Utah Indians. So, preferring the latter service, I transferred my trust to my brave and faithful friend McIntosh, and accompanied Captain Morris. The expedition consisted of 90 men. The object was a treaty of peace with the Utahs. We succeeded in finding the Indians, but as they supposed our only object was to fight, it was some time before we can get up to them. We at length surprised them in a gap in the mountains, when we succeeded in taking a number of prisoners, among whom were some chiefs. We explained our object. They then frankly informed us where their village was. We all repaired to it, and concluded terms of peace. Our approach greatly alarmed the village at first, but they knew that, in conjunction with the Apaches, they had been guilty of many depredations, although it had been their policy to throw all the blame of the mischief upon their allies. Our mission performed, we returned to Taos. I remained some weeks inactive. Taos was convulsed with continual alarms from reports that Cortez was approaching against us with a great force. The troops were all away at Santa Fe, though, had he visited us, we could have improvised a warm reception. We had a small piece of cannon, with plenty of grape and canister, with which we could have swept the streets. We tried its effect one day, just to satisfy the curiosity of the Mexicans. We put in a heavy charge of grape shot, and discharged it down the street. The tawny Mexicans were wonder-stricken. They thought an army would stand but a poor chance before such a volcanic belching of iron missiles. Poultry in the vicinity of Taos became exceedingly scarce. It was a rare matter to hear a cock crow. When we did by chance hear the pleasing sound, we would listen for the repetition of it, in order to learn from which direction it proceeded. We would then visit the telltale's quarters after dark, as we could obtain our poultry cheaper at night than in the daytime. Orders had been issued to take nothing from the enemy without paying for it, which orders were evidently based upon the assumption that we had money to pay with. Those without money did not feel themselves bound by the injunction. The authorities that issue similar commands in future would do well to insert some clause binding on the moneyless. Otherwise, these orders are all moonshine. From Taos, I proceeded to Santa Fe. I again started for the last time to Fort Leavenworth, McIntosh having safely returned from Chihuahua, again accompanying me. When we arrived at the wagon mound, we heard shots fired, and immediately after met a train of mule teams approaching at their quickest pace. The drivers advised us to return, as they had been attacked by the Apaches, and if we proceeded we could not escape being killed. I thought that my companion and I knew the Indians better than the mule drivers did, and we bade them goodbye and started on. We intended to avoid the Indians by making a circuit away from where we expected they would be, but in so doing we came directly upon the village. We stayed all night with them, were well treated, and resumed our journeys in the morning. We met a party of Americans who had been attacked by the Comanches and lost one horse, but we saw no more Indians until we reached the fort. Many times wonder has been expressed how I could always travel the road in safety while other men were attacked and killed. The only way in which I could account for the marvel was that I knew how to act the wolf while the others did not. Of all the dispatches I had ever carried, I never lost one, while numbers who have undertaken to bear them lost, not alone the dispatches, but their lives, for whenever they fell in with the Indians, they were sure to be killed. The Indians knew perfectly well what my business was. They knew that I was conveying orders backwards and forwards from the great white chief to his war chiefs in New Mexico. They would frequently ask me what the orders were which I had with me. Sometimes I would tell them that the great chief in Washington was going to send on a great host of warriors to rub them all out. They would laugh heartily at the supposition, for they conceived that all American forces combined would hardly be a circumstance before them. I promised to apprise them when the white warriors were to advance against them, which promise they confidently relied upon. I had to say something to keep on good terms with them, and answer their inquiries to satisfy them, and then proceed with my business. The war between the great white chief and the great Mexican chief interested the Indians but little, though their conviction was that the Mexican chief would be victorious. Their sympathy was with the latter, from motives of self-interest. They were now able to go at any time and drive home all the horses, cattle, and sheep that they wanted, together with Mexican children enough to take care of them. If the white chief conquered, they supposed he would carry all the horses, cattle, and sheep home with him, and thus leave none for them. The Comanches and the Apaches had a great number of Mexicans of both sexes among them, who seldom manifest much desire to return home. The women say that the Indians treat them better than they are treated at home. I never met but one exception to this rule, and that was a young Mexican woman captive among the Comanches. She told me that her father was wealthy and would give me $5,000 if I could procure her restoration. I bought her of the chief and conveyed her to my fort, whence I sent information to her father to acquaint him where he could find his daughter. In a few days her father and her husband came to her. She refused to have anything to say to her husband, for she said he was a coward. When the Indians attacked the village, he mounted his horse and fled, leaving her to their mercy. Her father proffered me the promised sum, but I only accepted $1,000, which returned me a good profit on the cost of the goods I had given to the Indians for a ransom. The woman returned home with her father, her valorous husband following her. Shortly after this, I returned to Santa Fe. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of the Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Holmes. Chapter 35. Departure for California. Meeting with the Apaches. Hostile threats. Trouble with the Utahs. Most terrible tragedy. Society in California. Adventures with grizzly bears. The last dispatches I bore from Fort Leavenworth were addressed to California, and I had undertaken to carry them through. At Santa Fe, I rested a week, and then, taking an escort of 15 men, I started on my errand. On our arrival at the village of Abigar, we found a large party of Apaches who were in the midst of a drunken carousel. We encamped inside the corral, that being as safe a place as we could select. Little Joe, an Apache chief, inquired of me what I was going to do with these whites. I'm going to take them to California, I told him. No, said he, you shall never take them nearer to California than they are now. Well, I shall try, I said. He held some further conversation with me of a denunciatory character, then left me to return to the liquor shop. Foreseeing what was likely to result if more liquor was obtained, I visited every place in town where it was kept and informed every seller that, if another drop was sold to the Indians, I would hang the man that did it without a minute's delay, and I would have been as good as my word, for they were all Mexicans, and I felt no great liking for them since the awful tragedy at Taos. But the priest began one or two in expostulation, but I cut them short. I'll hang your priest just as soon as any of you, if he dares to interfere in the matter. I suppose they intended to urge that their priest had authorized them to sell liquors to the Indians. My interdict stopped them, for there was no more sold while I was there. The next day I saw little Joe in one of the low saloons. The stimulus of the liquor had left him, and he had what topers called the horrors. He begged me to let him have 1 dram more, but I refused. Whiskey, I said, put all kinds of nonsense into your head when you get drunk, and then you are ripe for any mischief. When he had become perfectly sober, he came to me and again asked, if it were true, kill your whole party, and you with them. You will never listen to us. Your ears are stopped. We all love you, but we have told you many times that we hate the whites, and do not want you to lead them through our hunting grounds and show them our paths. But you will not listen to us, and now, if you undertake to pass through that canyon, we will, without fail, kill you. Well, I replied, I shall certainly go, so you had better get your warriors ready. We packed our animals, and I directed my men to travel slowly while I went through the canyon. If I wished them to advance, I would climb up and show myself to them as a signal for them to rush through and reach me as soon as possible. I then went on all alone, as I knew that, if I encountered the Indians in the canyon, they would not kill me by myself. I paused through without meeting any, and I signaled to the men to come on. They soon joined me, and we issued upon the open prairie. Here we discovered 300 Apaches, each man leading his war horse. We numbered 18, 2 of whom were Mexicans. They did not offer to attack us, however, and we continued our route unmolested, although they kept on our trail for 20 miles. A little before dark, we rested to take supper, starting again immediately after the meal was finished. We saw no more of the Apaches. The following afternoon, a Utah came to us. I asked him where his village was. He did not know, he said, as he had been away some time. I was going out to shoot game at the time, and I took the Indian with me, lending him a gun belonging to one of my men. I had killed 2 or 3 wild turkeys, while my Indian, discovering deer some distance off, went in pursuit. I returned to the camp, but the fellow had not arrived. When we started in the morning, he had not shown himself. The second day after the disappearance of the Indian with my gun, I was some distance in advance of the party, when, on ascending a hill, I saw a large party of Utahs ahead. They were looking down and examining the trail very closely to see if we had passed. This convinced me that the Indian fugitive had lied to me, that he knew well where his village was, and had, no doubt, been sent out from it as a spy. We held on our way till we came up with him, and it being then about noon, we halted to take a long rest. The Indians soon came flocking round us, but I gave strict orders to the men to keep a good lookout, and upon no account to let them touch the firearms. They swarmed around the camp, entering it one at a time, and I determined to make the first troublesome advance an excuse for getting rid of them. We packed up and moved on through the whole mass of Indians, but they did not venture an attack, although it had been their intention to do so if they could have got any advantage through our negligence. They were embittered against the whites at that time on account of a severe whipping that had been recently inflicted upon 2 of their warriors by Choctaw, who had just passed through them. for a theft from his camp. To receive a whipping, especially at the hands of a white man, is looked upon by them as a lasting infamy, and they would prefer death to the disgrace. The next morning they overtook us again, and the Indian returned me my gun. I mollified them with a few traffic presents, and they finally left us on apparently good terms. The next hostile country that lay upon our road was that of the Navajo tribe. They followed us through their whole strip of territory, shouting after us and making insulting gestures, but they took the precaution to keep out of gunshot range, and I did not think it worth my while to chastise them. The next tribe on our route was the Paiuches, which is also the last before you reach Pueblo in California. The first Paiuches that we came across were an Indian and a squaw engaged in digging roots. On seeing us approach, the Indian took to his heels, leaving the squaw to take care of herself. I rode up to her and asked her where her village was. She pointed in the direction of it, but I could not see it. The next one that I saw stooped and concealed himself in the grass. Immediately he found himself observed, but I rode up to him and made him show himself, not wishing to have him think that he could escape our notice so easily. He accompanied me for a short distance until another of the tribe shouted to him from a hill, and he then left me. We encamped that night upon the prairie. At dusk, we observed the smoke of a campfire in every direction, and shortly we were visited by hundreds of Indians, who entirely hemmed us in. But on their finding that we were not Mexicans, they did not offer to molest us. They were hostile on account of the continual abductions of their squaws and children, whom the Mexicans employ as domestic slaves and treat them with the utmost cruelty. We reached our destination in safety, and I delivered my dispatches. I was now inactive for some time again, and occupied my leisure in rambling about the environs of Monterey. I then engaged in the service of the commissariat at Monterey to carry dispatches from thence to Captain Denny's ranch, where I was met by another carrier. On my road lay the mission of San Miguel, owned by a Mr. Reed, an Englishman, and as his family was a very interesting one, I generally made his home my resting place. On one of my visits, arriving about dusk, I entered the house as usual, but was surprised to see no one stirring. I walked about a little to attract attention, and no one coming to me. I stepped in the kitchen to look for some of the inmates. On the floor I saw someone lying down, asleep, as I supposed. I attempted to arouse him with my foot, but he did not stir. This seemed strange, and my apprehensions became excited, for the Indians were very numerous about, and I was afraid some mischief had been done. I returned to my horse for my pistol, then, lighting a candle, I commenced the search. In going along a passage, I stumbled over the body of a woman. I entered a room and found another, a murdered Indian woman who had been domestic. I was about to enter another room, but I was arrested by some sudden thought which urged me to search no further. It was an opportune admiration, for that very room contained the murderers of the family who had heard my steps and were sitting at that moment with their pistols pointed at the door, ready to shoot the first person that entered. This they confessed subsequently. Thinking to obtain further assistance, I mounted my horse and rode to the nearest ranch, a distance of 24 miles, where I procured 15 Mexicans and Indians and returned with them the same night to the scene of the tragedy. On again entering the house, we found 11 bodies all thrown together in one pile for the purpose of consuming them. For on searching further, we found the murderers had set fire to the dwelling, but according to that providence which exposes such wicked deeds, the fire had died out. Fastening up the house, we returned immediately back to the ranch from which I had started with my party. Making 72 miles, I rode that night. As soon as I could obtain some rest, I started, in company with the alcalde, for St. Louis Obispo, where it was believed we could get assistance in capturing the murderers. 40 men in detached parties, moving in different directions, went in pursuit. It was my fortune to find the trail, and with my party of 6 men, I managed to head off the suspected murderers so as to come up with them in the road from directly the opposite direction from Reed's house. When I came opposite, one of the men sang out, "Good day, senors," I replied, but kept on riding in a lope. The bandits, thrown entirely off their guard, insisted upon entering into conversation, so I had a fair opportunity of marking them all and discovering among them a horse belonging to the unfortunate Reed. I then rode to Santa Barbara, a distance of 40 miles, with a party of 20 men, started boldly in pursuit. After much hard travel, we finally came upon the gang and camped for the night. Without a moment's hesitation, we charged on them, gave a volley of rifles, killed one and wounded all the others, save an American named Dempsey. The villains fought like tigers, but were finally mastered and made prisoners. Dempsey turned state evidence. He stated that on the night of the murder, his party stopped at Reed's. That Reed told him that he had just returned from the mines, whereupon it was determined to kill the whole family and take his gold, which turned out to be the pitiful sum of $1,000. After the confession of Dempsey, we shot the murderers, along with the state's evidence, and thus ended the lives of 2 Americans, 2 Englishmen, and 10 Irishmen, they having committed the most diabolical deed that ever disgraced the annals of frontier life. I continued in the service of carrying dispatches for 4 months, varying my route with an occasional trip to San Francisco. At this time, society in California was in the worst condition to be found, probably in any part of the world, to call it civilized. The report of the discovery of gold had attracted thither lawless and desperate characters from all parts of the earth, and the government constituted for their control was a weaker element than the offenders it had to deal with. The rankest excesses were familiar occurrences, and the men were butchered under the very eyes of the officers of peace, and no action was taken for the matter. What honest men they were became alarmed, and frequently would abandon the richest places for the mere security of their lives, and leave a whole community of rowdies to prey upon each other. Disorder attained its limit, and some reactionary means would naturally be engendered as a corrective to the existing evils. The establishment of vigilance committees among the better order of citizens operated as a thunderbolt upon the conniving civil officers and the rank perpetrators of crime. Scores of victims were snatched from the hands of these mock officers and summarily strung up to the limb of the nearest tree. Horse and cattle thieves had their necks disjointed so frequently that it soon became safe for a man to leave his horse standing in the street for a few moments while he stepped into a house to call upon his friend, and that widely practiced business was quickly done away with. Such sudden justice overtook murderers, robbers, and other criminals that honest people began to breathe more freely and acquired a sense of security while engaging in their ordinary pursuits. The material for crime still existed, and it is yet present in California to an alarming extent, but order may be considered as confirmed in the supremacy, though inevitably many social evils still exist, which time alone will remedy. In the month of April 1849, the steamship California touched at Monterey, she being the first steam vessel that had visited there from the States. I, with a party of 15 others, stepped on board and proceeded as far as Stockton, where we separated into various parties. I left with one man to go to Sonora, where we erected the first tent and commenced a business in partnership. I had carried a small lot of clothing along with me, which I disposed of to the miners at what now seems to me fabulous prices. Finding the business thus profitable, I sent my partner back to Stockton for a further supply, and he brought several mules laden with goods. This lot was disposed of as readily as the first and at prices equally remunerative. This induced us to continue the business, he performing the journeys backwards and forwards, and I remaining behind to dispose of the goods and attend to other affairs. Sonora was rapidly growing into a large village, and our tent was replaced with a roomy house. I had corps of Indians in my employ to take charge of the horses left in my care by the miners and other persons, sometimes to the number of 200 at once. I also employed Indians to work in the mines, I furnishing them with board and implements to work with, and they paying me with one half of their earnings. Their general yield was from 5 to 6 ounces a day each man, a moiety of what they faithfully rendered to me. Among my earliest visitors was a party of 18 United States dragoons who came to me fitted out with citizens' clothing, as they had brought to a certain period their service to this country. It was an impossible thing at that time to retain troops in California, for the produce of the mines held out a temptation to desert that none seemed able to resist, as more gold could be dug sometimes in one day than would pay a private for a year's service in the army. Even officers of considerable rank and not infrequently threw aside epaulet and sash and shouldered the pick to repair to the diggings. While at Sonora, I learned that Colonel Fremont was at Mariposa, and I made a journey over there for the purpose of seeing him. I was disappointed in my expectation and started to return home again. While proceeding quietly along, having left the main road and taken up a hollow, I perceived 2 men approaching me from the opposite direction, running at the top of their speed, and a crowd of Indians after them in pursuit. When they came up, they shouted to me to turn and fly for my life, or the Indians would certainly massacre me. I bade them stop and quiet their fears. Seeing my self-possession notwithstanding the near approach of the Indians, they at length halted, and approached close to me for protection against their pursuers. I then commanded the Indians to stand, telling them that they were my men. They said they were not aware of that, and they should not have chased them. The Indians I was acquainted with. They had been frequently to my house to invite me to their village. They wished to purchase goods of me, and had promised me a mule load of gold dust if I would only supply them with what they were in need of. I accompanied them to their village, but my 2 rescued companions were not admitted into their lodges. They then renewed their promise of the mule load of gold dust if I would bring out the goods they wanted. I never went to them, although it was remiss in me, for they had a great quantity of gold dust. I left after a brief visit and rejoined the 2 men. They could not sufficiently express their gratitude to me for their deliverance, as they considered my opportune appearance alone saved their lives. Becoming tired of my business in Sonora, for inactivity fatigued me to death, I disposed of my interest in it for $6,000 and went on to Sacramento City with the money in my pocket. From this place I traveled on to Murderer's Bar, which lies on the middle fork of the American River. Here I found my own friend Chapineau housekeeping, and stayed with him until the rainy season set in. Thence I proceeded to Greenwood Valley to establish my winter quarters, but I was seized with an attack of inflammatory rheumatism, and I had a nice time of it that winter. Before I was able to get about, I was called on by the inhabitants to go several miles to shoot a grizzly bear, as I was unable to walk the distance. Several of them volunteered to carry me. The bear was in the habit of walking past a row of cabins every morning on his return to his den, he having issued forth the preceding night to procure his evening meal. They had fired several shots at Bruin as he passed, but he had never deigned to pay any attention to the molestation. I mounted a horse and rode some distance along his customary path until I came to a tree which offered a fair shelter to await his approach. I placed my back against it as a support while I awaited his coming, the neighbors drawing off to a safe distance to witness the sport. By and by, Grizzly came in sight, walking along as independently as an alderman-elect. I allowed him to approach till he was within 20 paces. When I called out to him, he stopped suddenly and looked around to ascertain whence the sound proceeded. As he arrested himself, I fired, and the ball entered his heart. He advanced 10 or 15 paces before he fell. The observers shouted to me to run, they forgetting in their excitement that I had not strength to move. The bear never stirred from where he fell, and he expired without a groan. When dressed, he weighed over 1,400 pounds. The grizzly bear is a formidable animal and has acted a prominent part among the settlers of California. They are seldom known to attack man unless wounded. In that case, if a tree is by, the hunter had better commence climbing. They are very plenty from the Sierra Nevada to the coast range of the mountains. I have, in the course of my sojourn in the country, killed a great many of them, and met with some singular adventures. On one occasion, while I was with the Crow Indians, there was a man of the name of Coe who was trapping in one of the neighboring streams, and I became alarmed for his safety, as Blackfoot parties were skulking about in all directions, and were sure to kill him if they should find his camp. I found Coe and told him my fears. He instantly gathered up his traps, and mounting his horse, started towards me. When within fair gunshot, an old bear sprang from a thicket and landed upon the flanks of his horse, applying his teeth to the roots of the poor animal's tail and holding him as if in a vice. Cole leaned over his horse's neck and cried out, "Shoot, Jim, shoot quick." I could not help laughing to have saved my life. As he turned from side to side, though his situation was a critical one, I soon got in a favorable position and put a ball in the animal's head, just behind the ear, when he liberated the horse and his rider, falling on his back, apparently stone dead. There is a story remembered by the mountaineers of a person named Kairi. He was a man who never exceeded 100 pounds in weight, but was a clear grit, what little there was of him. He went out one day alone, and his horse came back in the evening without his rider, and we thought that the Indians made sure of poor Kairi's scalp. The next morning, a small party of us started on the horse's trail, and found Kairi lying beside a large dead grizzly bear. Kairi was horribly mutilated and insensible, but still alive, and must have soon died if no one had come to his rescue. We took him to camp and nursed him with all possible care. When he recovered sufficiently to tell his tale, his story was received with shouts of laughter and was rehearsed as a wonderful joke from camp to camp. Kairi stated that when he saw the grizzly, he got from his horse to shoot him, but unfortunately only wounded the animal. The bear, so Kairi says, caught hold of him and commenced a regular rough-and-tumble fight. Finally, Kairi got a good lick at the bear's head, knocked him down with his fist, and then attempted to run away. The bear, however, was too quick. When Kairi became desperate, seized the beast by the tongue, drew his knife, and stabbed the creature in the heart. Improbable as is the tale, it was a singular fact that when Kairi was found, his knife was up to the maker's name in the bear's side, and the body showed the effect of other severe stabs. But whether a man weighing 90 pounds can knock down the best of boxers weighing 1,200, the reader can decide. But Kairi ever told the same tale, and became known far and near as the man that whipped the grizzly in a stand-up fight. Probably no man ever recovered who received so many wounds as did Kairi in this unequal combat. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of the Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Ullman. Chapter 36. Discovery of Beckwourth's Pass. No pecuniary reward for public services. Transformation. A new character. Emigrants at home and at their journey's end. Description of the Happy Valley. Interesting reminiscences. The next spring I engaged in mining and prospecting in various parts of the gold region. I advanced as far as the American Valley, having one man in my company, and proceeded north into the Pitt River country, where we had a slight difficulty with the Indians. We had come upon a party who manifested the utmost friendship towards us, but I, knowing how far friendly appearances could be trusted to, cautioned my partner on no account to relinquish his gun, if the Indians should attempt to take it. They crowded round us, pretending to have the greatest interest in the pack that we carried, until they made a sudden spring and seized our guns, and attempted to wrest them from our grasp. I jerked from them and retreated a few steps. Then, cocking my gun, I bade them, if they wished to fight, to come on. This produced a change in their feelings, and they were very friendly again, begging caps and ammunition of us, which of course we refused. We then walked backwards for about 150 yards, still keeping our pieces ready should they attempt further hostilities, but they did not deem it prudent to molest us again. While on this excursion, I discovered what is now known as Beckwourth's Pass, in the Sierra Nevada. For some of the elevation over which we passed, I remarked a place far away to the southward that seemed lower than any other. I made no mention of it to my companion, but thought that at some future time I would examine into it further. I continued on to Shasta with my fellow traveler, and returned after a fruitless journey of 18 days. After a short stay in the American Valley, I again started out with a prospecting party of 12 men. We killed a bullock before starting out, and dried the meat in order to have provisions to last us during the trip. We proceeded in an easterly direction, and all busied themselves in searching for gold. But my errand was of a different character. I had come to discover what I suspected to be a pass. It was the latter end of April when we entered upon an extensive valley at the northwest extremity of the Sierra Range. The valley was already robed in freshest verdure, contrasting most delightfully with the huge snow-clad masses of rocks we had just left. Flowers of every variety and hue spread their variegated charms before us. Magpies were chattering and gorgeously plumaged. Birds were caroling in the delights of unmolested solitude. Swarms of wild geese and ducks were swimming on the surface of the cool crystal stream, which was the central fork of the Rio de las Plumas, or sailed the air in clouds over our heads. Deer and antelope filled the plains, and their boldness was conclusive that the hunter's rifle was to them unknown. Nowhere visible were any traces of the white man's approach, and it is probable that our steps were the first that ever walked the spot. We struck across this beautiful valley to the waters of the Yuba, from thence to the waters of the Truckee, which latter flowed in an easterly direction, telling us we were on the eastern slope of the mountain range. This, I at once saw, would afford the best wagon road into the American Valley, approaching from the eastward, and I imparted my views to 3 of my companions, in whose judgment I placed the most confidence. They thought highly of the discovery, and even proposed to associate with me in opening the road. We also found gold, but not in sufficient quantity to warrant our working it, and furthermore the ground was too wet to admit of our prospecting to any advantage. On my return to the American Valley, I made known my discovery to Mr. Turner, a proprietor of the American Ranch, who entered enthusiastically into my views. It was a thing, he said, he had never dreamed of before. If I could but carry out my plan and divert travel into the road, he thought I should be a made man for life. Thereupon he drew me up a subscription list, setting forth the merits of the project, and showing how the road could be made practicable to Bidwell's Bar and thence to Marysville, which latter place would derive peculiar advantages from the discovery. He headed the subscription with $200. When I reached Bidwell's Bar and unfolded my project, the town was seized with a perfect mania for the opening of the route. The subscriptions towards the fund required for its accomplishment amounted to $500. I then proceeded to Marysville, a place which would unquestionably derive greater benefit from the newly discovered route than any other place on the way, since this must be the entrepot, or principal starting place for emigrants. I communicated with several of the most influential residents on the subject in hand. They also spoke very encouragingly of my undertaking and referred me before all others to the mayor of the city. Accordingly, I waited upon that gentleman, a Mr. Miles, and brought the matter under his notice, representing it as being a legitimate matter for his interference, and offering substantial advantages to the commercial prosperity of the city. The mayor entered warmly into my views, and pronounced it as his opinion that the profits resulting from the speculation could not be less than from $6,000 to $10,000, and as the benefits accruing the city would be incalculable, he would insure my expenses while engaged upon it. I mentioned that I should prefer some guarantee before entering upon my labors to secure me against loss of what money I might lay out. "Leave that to me," said the mayor. "I will attend to the whole affair. I feel confident that a subject of so great importance to our interest will engage the earliest attention." I thereupon left the whole proceeding in his hands, and immediately setting men to work upon the road, went out to the Truchy to turn emigration into my newly discovered route. While thus busily engaged, I was seized with erysipelas, and abandoned all hopes of recovery. I was over 100 miles away from medical assistance, and my only shelter was a brush tent. I made my will and resigned myself to death. Life still lingered in me, however, and a train of wagons came up and encamped near to where I lay. I was reduced to a very low condition, but I saw the drivers and acquainted them with the object which had brought me out there. They offered to attempt the new road if I thought myself sufficiently strong to guide them through it. The women, God bless them, came to my assistance, and through their kind attentions and excellent nursing, I rapidly recovered from my lingering sickness, until I was soon able to mount my horse and lead the first train, consisting of 17 wagons, through Beckwourth's Pass. We reached the American Valley without the least accident, and the emigrants expressed entire satisfaction with the route. I returned with the train through to Marysville, and on the intelligence being communicated of the practicability of my road, there was quite a public rejoicing. A northern route had been discovered, and the city had received an impetus that would advance her beyond all her sisters on the Pacific shore. I felt proud of my achievements, and was foolish enough to promise myself a substantial recognition of my labors. I was destined to be disappointed, for that same night Marysville was laid in ashes. The mayor of the ruined town congratulated me upon bringing a train through. He expressed great delight at my good fortune, but regretted that their recent calamity had placed it entirely beyond his power to obtain for me any substantial reward, with the exception of some $200 subscribed by some liberal-minded citizens of Marysville. I have received no indemnification for the money and labor I have expended upon my discovery. The city has been greatly benefited by it, as all must acknowledge, for the emigrants that now flock to Marysville would otherwise have gone to Sacramento. $1,600 I expended upon the road is forever gone. But those who derive advantage from this outlay and loss of time devoted no thought to the discoverer, nor do I see clearly how I am to help myself, for everyone knows I cannot roll a mountain into the pass and shut it up. But there is one thing certain, although I recognize no superior in love of country, and feel in all its force the obligation imposed upon me to advance her interest, still, when I go out hunting in the mountains, a road for everybody to pass through, and expending my time and capital upon an object for which I shall derive no benefit, it will be because I have nothing better to do. In the spring of 1852, I established myself in Beckwourth Valley, and finally found myself transformed into a hotel keeper and chief of a trading post. My house is considered the emigrant's landing place, as it is the first ranch he arrives at in the Golden State, and is the only house between this point and Salt Lake. Here is a valley 240 miles in circumference, containing some of the choicest land in the world. Its yield of hay is incalculable. The red and white clovers spring up spontaneously, and the grass that covers its smooth surface is of the most nutritious nature. When the weary, toil-worn emigrant reaches this valley, he feels himself secure. He can lay himself down and taste refreshing repose, undisturbed by the fear of Indians. His cattle can graze around him in pasture up to their eyes, without running any danger of being driven off by the Arabs of the forest, and springs flow before them as pure as any that refreshes this verdant earth. When I stand at my door and watch the weary, way-worn travelers approach, their wagons holding together by a miracle, their stock in the last stage of emaciation, and themselves a perfect exaggeration of caricature, I frequently amuse myself with imagining the contrast they must offer to the tout ensemble and general opinion that presented to their daring friends when they first set out upon their journey. We will take a fancy sketch of them as they start from their homes. We will fancy their strong and well-stored wagon, brand new for the occasion, and so firmly put together that, to look at it, one would suppose it fit to circumrotate the globe as many times as there are spokes in the wheels. Then their fat and frightened steers, so high-spirited and fractious that it takes the father and his 2 or 3 sons to get each under the yoke. Next, the ambitious emigrant and his proud family, with their highly raised expectations of the future that is before them. The father, so confident and important, who deems the Eastern States unworthy of his abilities, and can alone find a sufficiently ample field in the growing republic on the Pacific side. The mother, who is unwilling to leave her pleasant gossiping friends and early associations, is still half tempted to believe that the crop of gold that waits their gathering may indemnify her for her labors. So they pull up stakes and leave town in good style, expecting to return with whole cartloads of gold dust, and dazzle their neighbors' eyes with their excellent good fortune. The girls, dear creatures, put on their very best, as all their admiring beaux assemble to see them, and to give them the last kiss they will receive east of the Nevada mountains. For their idea is that they will be snatched up and married the moment they step over the threshold into California by some fine young gentleman who is a solid pile of gold, and they joyously start away in anticipation of the event, their hats decked with ribbons, their persons in long flowing riding dresses, their delicate fingers glittering with rings, their charming little ankles encased in their fashionable and neatly laced gaiters. At the close of the day, perhaps amid a pelting rain, these same parties heave wearily into sight. They have achieved the passage of the plains, and their pleasant eastern homes, with their agreeable, sociable neighbors, are now at a distance it is painful to contemplate. The brave show they made at starting, as the whole town hurried them off, is sadly faded away. Their wagon appears like a relic of the Revolution after doing hard service for the commissariat. Its cover burned into holes and torn to tatters, its strong axles replaced with rough pieces of trees hewn by the wayside, the tires bound on with ropes, the iron linchpins gone and chips of hickory substituted, and rags wound round the hubs to hold them together, which they keep continually wetted to prevent falling to pieces. The oxen are held up by the tail to keep them upon their legs, and the ravens and magpies evidently feel themselves ill-treated in being driven off from what they deem their lawful rights. The old folks are peevish and quarrelsome. The young men are so headstrong, and the small children so full of wants, and precisely at a time when everything has given out, and they have nothing to pacify them with. But the poor girls have suffered the most. Their glossy, luxuriant locks, that won so much admiration, are now frizzled and discoloured by the sun. Their elegant riding habit is replaced with an improvised bloomer, and their neat little feet are exposed in sad disarray. Their fingers are white no longer, and in place of rings we see sundry bits of rag wound round to keep the dirt from entering their sore cuts. The young men of gold, who looked so attractive in the distance, are now too often found to be worthless, of no intrinsic value, their time employed in haunting gaming tables or dram shops, and their habits corrupted by unthrift and dissipation. I do not wish to speak disparagingly of my adopted state, and by no means to intimate the slightest disrespect to the many worthy citizens who have crossed the plains. I appeal to the many who have witnessed the picture for the accuracy of my portraiture. So much good material constantly infused into society ought to improve the character of the compound, but the demoralizing effect of transplantation greatly neutralizes the benefits. Take a family from their peaceful and happy home in a community where good morals are observed and the tone of society exercises a salutary influence, and over the thoughts of both old and young, and put them in such a place as this, where all is chaotic, and the principles that regulate the social intercourse of men are not yet recognized as law, and their dignity of thought and prestige of position is bereft from them. They have to struggle among a greedy, unscrupulous populace for the means of living. Their homes have yet acquired no comfort, and they feel isolated and abandoned. And it is even worse upon the children. All corrective influence is removed from them, and the examples that surround them are often of the most vicious and worst possible description. All wholesome objects of ambition being removed, and money alone substituted as the reward of their greed. They grow up unlike their fathers, and it is only those in whom there is a solid substratum of correct feeling that mature into good citizens and proper men. The girls, too, little darlings, suffer severely. They have left their worthy sweethearts behind, and cannot get back to them, and those who now offer themselves here are not fit to bestow a thought upon. Everything is strange to them. They miss their little social reunions, their quilting parties, their winter quadrilles, the gossip of the village, their delightful summer haunts, and their dear paternal fireside. They have no pursuits except of the grosser kind, and all their refinements are roughed over by the prevailing struggle after gold. Much stock is lost in crossing the plains, through their drinking the alkali water which flows from the Sierra Nevada, becoming impregnated with the poisonous material either in its source or in its passage among the rocks. There are also poisonous herbs springing up in the region of the mineral waters, which the poor, famishing animals devour without stint. Those who survive until they reach the valley are generally too far gone for recovery, and die while resting to recruit their strength. Their infected flesh furnishes food to thousands of wolves, which infest this place in the winter, and its effect upon them is singular. It depilates their warm coats of fur, and renders their pelts as bare as the palm of a man's hand. My faithful dogs have killed numbers of them at different times. Divested entirely of hair except on the extremity of the nose, ears, and tail, they present a truly comical and extraordinary appearance. This general loss of cattle deprives many of the poor emigrants of the means of hauling their lightened wagons, which, by the time they reach my ranch, seldom contain anything more than their family clothing and bedding. Frequently I have observed wagons pass my house with one starveling yoke of cattle to drag them, and the family straggling on foot behind. Numbers have put up at my ranch without a morsel of food, and without $1 in the world to procure any. They never were refused what they asked for at my house, and during the short space that I have spent in the valley, I have furnished provisions and other necessaries to the numerous sufferers who have applied for them to a very serious amount. Some have since paid me, but the bills of many remain unsettled. Still, although a prudent business man would condemn the proceedings, I cannot find it in my heart to refuse relief to such necessities, and, if my pocket suffers a little, I have my recompense in a feeling of internal satisfaction. My pleasant valley is 35 miles at its greatest breadth. It is irrigated by 2 streams with their various small tributaries. These form a junction about 10 miles from my house up the valley, which, as you remount it, becomes the central fork of the Feather River. All these streams abound with trout, some of them weighing 7 or 8 pounds. In the main ones there are also plenty of otter. Antelopes and deer are to be found the entire year, unless the winter is unusually severe, when they cross the mountains in the eastern slope. Grizzly bears come and disappear again without asking leave of any man. There are wolves of every species, together with foxes, hares, rabbits, and other animals. Of the feathered tribe, we have wild geese, ducks, sage hens, grouse, and a large variety of smaller birds. Service berries and cherries are the only kinds of fruit that grow from nature's cultivation. The growth of timber about the valley is principally pitch pine, although there is a considerable intermixture of cedar. I have never yet sown any grain, but I have cultivated a small kitchen garden, and raised cabbage, turnips, and radishes of great size. I have never known the snow to fall to a greater depth than 3 feet, and when the storms are over it dissolves very rapidly, notwithstanding the elevation is many thousand feet above the level of the Pacific. The snow clings to the mountain peaks that overlook the valley to the eastward the year round, and as it is continually melting and feeding the streams, it keeps the water icy cold all the summer through. About 1.5 miles distance from my house, there is a large sulphur spring, and on the eastern slope, in the desert, there are copious hot springs, supplying the traveler with boiling water for his coffee without the cost of fuel. The country rises on the summit of the Sierra Nevada, opposite the headwaters of the Yuba, and runs in an easterly direction until it loses itself in Pyramid Lake, about 50 miles east of this valley. This lake is a great natural curiosity, as it receives not alone the waters of the Trunchi, but numerous other streams, and has no visible outlet, its surcharge of water probably filtering into the earth, like St. Mary's River and some others I have met with. There is no place in the whole state that offers so many attractions for a few weeks or months' retirement, for its charms of scenery with sylvan and piscatorial sports present unusual attractions. During the winter season, my nearest neighbors are 16 miles away. In the summer they are within 4 miles of my house, so that social broils do not much disturb me. There is a pleasant historical incident associated with St. Mary's River, which, as it can be familiar to but few of my readers, I will relate here. The St. Mary's River is known to most persons as the River Humboldt, since that is the name that has been since conferred upon it, in honor of the distinguished European traveler. I prefer the former name as being more poetical, though less assuming. An Indian woman, the wife of a Canadian named Chapineau, who acted as interpreter and guide to Lewis and Clark during their explorations of the Rocky Mountains, was suddenly seized with the pains of labor and gave birth to a son on the banks of this mysterious river. The red-headed chief, Clark, adopted the child thus rudely issued into the world, and on his return to St. Louis, took the infant with him and baptized it John Baptist Clark Chapineau. After a careful culture of his mind, the boy was sent to Europe to complete his education, but the Indian was ineffaceable in him. The Indian lodge and his native mountain fastnesses possessed greater charms than the luxuries of civilized life. He returned to the desert and passed his days with his tribe. Mary, the mother of the child, was a Crow, very pleasing and intelligent, and may have been, for all I know, connected with some of my many relatives in that tribe. It was in honor of this event, and to perpetuate her memory, that the river received its original name, St. Mary's, and as such is still known to the mountaineers. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37 of the Life and Adventure of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Gary Oldman. Chapter 37. Mistakes regarding the character of the Indian. Extent of the Western tribes. Their character. How a war against them should be conducted. Reflections. Closing address to the Indian heroine. As an American citizen, a friend of my race, and a sincere lover of my country, and also as one well acquainted with the Indian character, I feel that I cannot properly conclude the record of my eventual life without saying something for the red man. It should be remembered, when judging of their acts, that they consider the country they inhabit as the gift of the Great Spirit, and they resent in their hearts the invasion of the immigrant just as much as any civilized people would. If another nation without permission should cross their territory, it must also be understood that the Indians believe the buffalo to be theirs by inheritance, not as game, but in the light of ownership given to them by Providence for their support and comfort, and that when an immigrant shoots a buffalo, the Indian looks upon it exactly as the destruction by a stranger of so much private property. With these ideas clearly in mind of the reader, it can be understood why the Indian, in destroying a cow belonging to white people, or stealing a horse, considers himself as merely retaliating for injuries received, repaying himself, in fact, for what he has lost. For this act on the part of the red man, the United States troops are often turned indiscriminately upon his race. The innocent generally suffer, and those who have raised the storm cannot understand of what crime they can be guilty. But if the government is determined to make war upon the Western tribes, let it be done intelligently and so effectually that mercy will temper justice. To attempt to chastise the Indians with United States troops is simply ridiculous. The expense of such campaigns is only surpassed by the inefficiency. The Indians live on horseback, and they can steal and drive off the government horses faster than they can bring them together. The Indians having no stationary villages, they can travel faster, even with the encumbrances of their lodges, women, and children, subsisting themselves on buffalo slain on the way, than any force, however richly appointed, the country could send against them. An army must tire out in such a chase before summer is gone, while the Indians will constantly harass it with their sharpshooters, and should several powerful tribes unite, not an unusual occurrence, many thousand men would make no impression. It should also be recollected by our officers sent to fight in the Rocky Mountains that the Indians have a mode of telegraphing by the aid of robes and mirrors, and thus, by having their spies stationed at convenient distances, they convey intelligence of the movements of their enemies at great distances and in very few minutes, thus informing villages whether it would be best to retreat or not. Some tribes telegraph by fire at night and by smoke in the daytime. An officer might hear of a band of warriors encamped at a certain place. He immediately makes a forced march, and when his troops arrive at their destination, these same warriors may be many miles in his rear and camped on his trail. A village of 300 lodges of Crows or Cheyennes could, within 30 minutes after receiving an order to move, have all their lodges struck, the poles attached to the horses, and their men, women, and children going at full speed, and could thus outstrip the best dragoons sent in their pursuit. I have seen enough of Indian treaties and annuities to satisfy me that their effects for good are worse than fruitless. The idea formed by the Indians is that the annuities are sent to them by the great white chief because he is afraid of them and wishes to purchase their friendship. There are some of the tribes, a very few, who would keep a treaty sacred, but the majority would not be bound by one, for they cannot understand their nature. When caught at a disadvantage and reduced to enter into a compact, they would agree to any proposals that were offered, but when the controlling power is withdrawn, and they can repeat their depredations with apparent impunity, no moral obligation would restrain them, and the treaty that was negotiated at so much cost to the country proves a mere delusion. The officer having charge of an expedition against the Indian should rightly understand which band of a tribe he is commissioned to punish. The Sioux, for instance, which a few years ago could raise 30,000 warriors, are divided into many bands, which at times are hundreds of miles apart. One band of that tribe may commit a depredation on the emigrant road, and the other bands not even have heard of it. They do not hold themselves amenable for the misdeeds of another body totally distinct from them in social relations, and to inflict chastisement upon them in such a case would be a manifest injustice. But in a case of extreme danger, all these bands coalesce. Other tribes have the same divisions into distinct bands. Many are hence led into the belief that each band is a tribe. The Sioux range over a territory upward of 1,000 miles in extent from north to south, and their country embraces some of the most beautiful spots in the world, as well for natural scenery as for extreme productiveness of soil. The Crows have but one band proper, although they are generally divided into two villages, as being a more convenient arrangement to afford pasture for their immense herd of horses, and also to hunt the buffalo. But these two villages are seldom more than 300 miles apart, generally much nearer. They come together at least once a year, and have frequent accidental coalitions in the course of their wanderings. They speak the Grovan language, from which nation they are an offshoot. The Pawnees are probably the most degraded, in point of morals, of all the western tribes. They are held in such contempt by the other tribes that none will make treaties with them. They are a populous nation, and are inveterate against the whites, killing them wherever met. A treaty concluded with that nation at night would be violated the next morning. Those who engage in warfare with the Western Indians will remember that they take no prisoners except women and children. It is generally believed that the Sioux never kill white men, but this is a mistake. They have always killed them. I have seen white men's scalps in their hands, many still fresh, hanging in the smoke of their lodges. The Western Indians have no hummocks or Everglades to fight among, but they have their boundless prairies to weary an army in, and the fastnesses of the Rocky Mountains to retreat to. Should a majority of these powerful nations coalesce in defense against one common enemy, it would be the worst Indian war, the most costly in blood and treasure that the national government has ever entered into. Coalition tribes could bring 250,000 warriors against any hostile force, and I know I am greatly within the limits of truth in assigning that number to them. If it is the policy of the government to utterly exterminate the Indian race, the most expeditious manner of effecting this ought to be the one adopted: the introduction of whiskey among the red men under the connivance of government agents leads to the demoralization and consequent extermination by more powerful races of thousands of Indians annually. Still, this infernal agent is not effectual. The Indians diminish in numbers, but with comparative slowness. The most direct and speedy mode of clearing the land of them would be by the simple means of starvation, by depriving them of their hereditary sustenance, the buffalo. To effect this, send an army of hunters among them, to root out and destroy in every possible manner the animal in question. They can shoot them, poison them, dig pitfalls for them, and resort to numberless other contrivances to efface the devoted animals, which serves, it would seem, by the wealth of his carcass to preserve the Indians, and thus impede the expanding development of civilization. To fight the Indians via armis, the government could employ no such effectual means as to take into its service 500 mountaineers for the space of 1 year, and any one tribe of Indians that they should fall afoul of could never survive the contest. Such men, employed for that purpose, would have no encumbrances from superfluous baggage to impede them in a pursuit or a retreat over their illimitable plains. The mode of life of a mountaineer just fits him for an Indian fighter, and if he has to submit to privation and put up with an empty commissariat, he has the means of support always at hand. He is so much an Indian from habit that he can fight them in their own way. If they steal his horse, he can steal theirs in return. If they snatch a hasty repose in the open air, it is all he asks for himself, and his health and spirits are fortified with such regimen. It is only by men possessing the qualities of the white hunter, combined with the Indian habits, that the Indians can be effectual and economically conquered. I have now presented a plain, unvarnished statement of the most noteworthy occurrences of my life, and in so doing I have necessarily led the reader through a variety of savage scenes at which his heart must sicken. The narrative, however, is not without its use. The restless, youthful mind that wearies with the monotony of peaceful, everyday existence, and aspires after a career of wild adventure and thrilling romance, will find, by my experience, that such a life is by no means one of comfort, and that the excitement which it affords is very dearly purchased by the opportunities lost of gaining far more profitable wisdom. Where one man would be spared, as I have been, to pass through the perils of fasting, the encounters with the savage, and the fury of the wild beasts, and still preserve his life, and attain an age of near 80, it is not too much to say that 500 would perish with not a single loved one near to catch his last whispered accent. would die in the wilderness, either in solitude or with the fiendish savage shrieking in revolting triumph in his ears. I now close the chapter of my eventful life. I feel that time is pressing, and the reminiscence of the past, stripped of all that was unpleasant, comes crowding upon me. My heart turns naturally to my adopted people. I think of my son, who is the chief. I think of his mother, who went unharmed through the medicine lodge. I think of Bar Chiampi, the brave heroine. I see her, tearful, watching my departure from the banks of the Yellowstone. Her nation expects my return, that I may be buried with my supposed fathers, but none look so eagerly for the great warrior as Pine Leaf, the Indian heroine. I've seen her in her youthful years. Her heart was light and free, her black eyes never dimmed with tears. So happy then was she. When warriors from the fight returned and halted for display the trophies that the victors won, she was first to bring away. I've seen her kiss her brother's cheek when he was called to go, the lurking enemy to seek, or chase the buffalo. She loved him with her sister's love. He was the only son, and Pine Leaf prized him far above the warrior's heart she won. I've seen her in her morning hours, that brother had been slain. Her head that oft was decked with flowers, now shed its crimson rain. Her bleeding head and bleeding hand, her crimson clotted hair, her brothers in the spirit land, and hence her keen despair. I've heard her make a solemn vow, a warrior I will be, until 100 foes shall bow, and yield their scalps to me. I will revenge my brother's death, I swear it on my life, or never, while I draw a breath, will I become a wife. I've seen her on her foaming steed, with battle-axe at hand, pursuing at her utmost speed the Blackfoot and the Cheyenne. I've seen her weld her polished lance 100 times and more, when charging fierce in the advance amid the battle's roar. I've seen her with her scalping knife spring on the fallen foe, and ere he was yet void of life, make sure to count her coup. I've seen her at full speed again, oft draw her trusty bow, across her arrow take good aim, and lay a warrior low. I've heard her say, I'll take my shield, my battle-axe and bow, and follow you through glen or field, where'er you dare to go. I rush amid the blood and strife, where any warrior leads. Pine Leaf would choose to lose her life amid such daring deeds. I've heard her say, the spirit land is where my thoughts incline, where I can grasp my brother's hand extended now for mine. There's nothing now in this wide world, no ties that bid me stay, but a broken-hearted Indian girl. I weep both night and day. He tells me in my midnight dreams I must revenge his fall. Then comes where flowers and cooling streams surround their spirits all. He tells me that the hunting ground so far away on high is filled with warriors all around, who numbly here did die. He says that all is joy and mirth where the Great Spirit lives, and joy that's never known on earth he constantly receives. No brother to revenge his wrongs, the war-path is my road. A few more days I'll sing his songs, then hie to his abode. I've heard her say, I'll be your bride. You waited long, I know. 100 foes by me have died, by my own hand laid low. 'Tis for my nation's good I wed, for I would still be free, until I slumber with the dead, but I will marry thee. And when I left the heroine, a tear stood in her eye. At last I held her hand in mine, and whispered goodbye. Oh, will you soon return again? the heroine did say. Yes, when the green grass decks the plain, I said, and came away. The end. End of chapter 37. Recording by Gary Ullman, my village blogger, West Palm Beach, Florida. End of The Life and Adventures of James P. Beckwourth by Thomas D. Bonner.